Earth does it mean? Kang looked slightly embarrassed at Sejong's question. Do I have some unspeakable twists and turns? That's not true. I just borrowed the name of a research institute that boasts excellent research results in the country of the West. I was embarrassed to tell you. I thought we would be told that we were using the West work too much before we even knew about it properly. There was a rumor going around that there were aliens in Area 51. But aren't there any aliens in Joseon? Sejong nodded at Hyang's answer. That's right. It's been said since ancient times that too much is too much and too little is too much. Make sure you keep an eye on excess and maintain moderation. Yes, Abima. By the way, it's nice for a rich person like this to ride a horse. That's right. Both King Sejong and Hyang were riding horses wearing full robe and robe. King Sejong was riding a white horse in Han, and Hyang was riding a maroon horse, moving side by side toward Area 51. The ministers were also following Sejong and Hyang on horseback. Area 51, prepared by the township, was an area a little southeast of Gunjagam. In terms of 21st century geography, the military flag was near Seoul City Hall, and Area 51 was the Ho Hyundong area. It's quite a large site. Yes. So a lot of money was spent on purchasing the land. Well done. No matter how much it is the government's job, you should not carelessly take away the people's property. King Sejong seemed to like Yang's work and did not spare praise. At least unlike the 21st century, they only charge the market price because it's the government's business. As Sejong and Hyang and his party arrived in front of the main gate of Area 51, the commander of the soldiers guarding the main gate stepped forward. Stop. Only authorized personnel may enter this place. Show me your badge. At the commander's words, Hyang rode to the front. Arriving in front of the commander, Hyang took out a small wooden board from her bosom and held it out to the commander. It's here. After checking the pattern on the wooden plaque, the commander took a step back and politely bowed. Insect. The soldiers guarding the gate opened the front gate wide at the gesture of the commander, who gave a military salute. Hyang returned to Sejong's side and guided him. Abima, please come in. I see. The security is really thorough. If you don't have a new ticket, even Soja can't enter. Sejong looked surprised at Hyang's answer. Really? Our crown prince really paid a lot of attention. Because this is a place where security is of utmost importance. After passing through the main gate, Sejong shook his head and looked at the incense with a tired expression. You're so persistent. Contrary to expectations that they would go straight inside after passing through the main gate, Sejong and his party moved along the white passage to the right. Both sides of the passage were blocked by high fences, and behind the fences, soldiers stood at regular intervals to monitor the passage. Sejong, who saw the soldiers bowing to him, looked back. What on earth are you doing inside that's so serious? These are jobs where confidentiality is vital. Meanwhile, King Sejong and his subjects following behind Hyang all had serious expressions. This strict facility is a research institute? What on earth are you studying? This is definitely a waste of budget. While various words were being exchanged, Huang He glared at Zhang Cho. Daegam, what were you doing while the crown prince was doing this? Aren't you also a vassal of Joseon? If this amount of expenditure is being spent, even the Daegam should have come forward and reported it. Zhang Cho accepted Huang He's criticism with a calm face. It's just there because I'm a subject. In my opinion right now, even this isn't enough. Huh? What? Huang He raised her voice, but Zhang Chu looked into the distance and muttered to himself. If you become a nobleman, your movements must be strong. Where can you be this light? Look, Captain Zhang. Huang He screamed, but Zhang Cho continued talking to himself. This is why there is no desk bite. It is not too late to talk after seeing the scene. Captain Zhang. Just as they were about to get off their horses and kill each other, the second door opened, and Sejong and Hyang went inside. As Sejong entered, he let out an exclamation. There were buildings on a vast site, 2/3 the size of the 21st century Hohyundong, Myeongdong, and Yeoljiro areas, according to Hyang's rough calculations, and black smoke was rising from one side. And to welcome King Sejong and his party, soldiers from the training center and the National Guard, as well as craftsmen from the military flag inspector and the Chamber of Commerce, stood in rows and rows. Military courtesy. Insect. Following the orders of Commander Choi Hae-san, the soldiers held a military salute, and the craftsmen knelt on the ground and bowed. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you. King Sejong's reign continued, and Choi Hae-san gave orders to his soldiers. Dissolution. At Choi Hae-san's order to disperse, the soldiers and craftsmen returned to their posts. Sejong and his party got off their horses and walked while being guided by Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon. What a great facility. Thank you. However, most of the facilities are the work of His Majesty the Crown Prince. Is that so? Then what do you usually do here? Improvement of gunpowder and development of new gunpowder, improvement of artillery and barrel, development of new artillery and gun barrel, development of new armor, development of tactics using newly created weapons, etc. As soon as Choi Hae-san finished speaking, Lee Cheon took over. To put it simply, we are working on everything military-related, except ships. Is it? While listening to Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon's answers, King Sejong looked around. The uniforms worn by the soldiers and military officers were very different from those of the soldiers he had seen. You said it was everything, but are you even tinkering with the clothes? Sejong, who was looking around while snorting, looked at the scent. Then let's take a look at what we've done so far. Yes, Abama. Generals. Yes. Your Highness, please come this way. Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon guided King Sejong and the ministers to a large open space. In the vacant lot that Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon guided us to, there was a long table and several objects. Hae-san Choi, who guided the people to where the statue was, began to explain. The first thing I will show His Majesty the Prime Minister is gunpowder. Gunpowders? That's right. Choi Hae-san pointed to the plates placed on the table. A small amount of gunpowder was placed on plates made of copper. First of all, from the far left, there is the gunpowder that our Joseon military used previously. Our research institute named it gap-type gunpowder. Next comes Yule-type gunpowder, which has the ingredients of gap-type gunpowder adjusted. Next to it is the explosive silver developed by the Crown Prince. And next to it is the explosive oil also created by the Crown Prince. Next to it is the prototype of cotton gunpowder made using acetic acid and other acids and cotton cloth. And the last one is the Diagap-style gunpowder, which makes the cotton powder a little easier to use. King Sejong, who was examining the gunpowder in response to Choi Hae-san's explanation, asked a question. How are each gunpowder different? And you said you made it easy to use. How did you do it? Let me explain. Choi Hae-san explained to King Sejong how he made it easy to use. The beginning of the improvement was almost the same as the existing method. Mix the raw materials for gunpowder well, then sprinkle water on it to make it sticky, shape it into a small meju, and dry it. Crush the appropriately dried gunpowder lumps and filter them through a sieve. Up to this point, it was the same as before. The existing method was to mix clean oil and store it in this state, but for fragrance, several steps were added. When sieving crushed gunpowder lumps, use sieves of various thicknesses. Gunpowder powder that passes through the finest sieve is used in the barrel, and gunpowder powder that is filtered at the next thickness is used in the artillery. Mix the filtered gunpowder powder with graphite powder. Black smoke? Sejong expressed doubts about the word graphite, which he had never heard before. Kang intervened in Sejong's reaction. When the National Resources Agency is established and prospectors are dispatched, the minerals I added to the list come. But, what utility does it have? It prevents moisture from penetrating and prevents gunpowder from self-destructing when it hits itself. There are many other benefits, but I will explain that later. Sejong narrowed his eyes and looked at Hyang in response to Hyang's clever answer. What is this kid? I understand. General, please continue. Yes, Your Majesty. If you mix it with graphite, as you explained, or process it closer to coating or overlaying graphite, storage becomes very easy. Of course, the box containing the gunpowder is double-layered, and there is a gap between the inner and outer boxes. We added charcoal and covered it with oiled paper to prevent moisture from entering as much as possible. But it is true that graphite does the most work. Coating? When a word he had never heard before appeared again, Sejong expressed doubt. Then, the scent quickly intervened. These are the words of the Westerners. Because a lot of their knowledge was put into the work of improving gunpowder, the language of the Westerners was often used. The process of converting it to Korean is in progress, but Sejong raised his hand to stop Hyang from speaking. I understand what the situation is. That's not what's important, General. Please proceed. Yes, Your Highness. Hyang, who was watching Sejong's reaction from the side, clenched the hand holding her back. It's a success. With this, we have crossed the 8th ridge of source washing. As she began to teach in earnest, Kang thought about ways to deal with the English that appeared without her knowledge. And what came out that way were books from the Eastern Roman Empire and Europe that filled the library. After that, whenever English came out without realizing it, Kang overcame the crisis by saying the following. I'm sorry. I read too many of Siwa's books. The problem was that as such incidents became more frequent, those who worked with Hyang also became accustomed to using English, Latin, and German words. Anyway, Choi Hasten continued his explanation. Next is the Yule-6 gunpowder, which we have improved this time. The most important thing is to change the raw materials. We buy sulfur. Take the emperor. At Choi Hasten's remarks, not only King Sejong, but also the ministers began to murmur. Did gunpowder explode even without sulfur? It explodes. Judge Hojo's eyes began to sparkle at Choi Hasten's answer. Prospectors found several sulfur mines, but the cost of mining them was prohibitive due to the poor location. You can save your budget. Let's do it. Unlike Judge Hojo's liking, King Sejong listened with a serious expression. Is there any problem with removing the sulfur? For example, won't the explosive power decrease? The explosive power is almost the same. But adding sulfur to making gunpowder has been done for a long time. So isn't this necessarily a twist? Is it really okay to leave out the sulfur? You make the right point. After taking a moment to catch his breath, Hasten Choi responded to Sejong's point. When you remove sulfur from gunpowder, you gain a characteristic, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. What are its characteristics? An ordinary wick won't ignite gunpowder. Then it's useless. Sejong, who was about to make a point, looked back at Hyang and Choi Hasten. Only our Joseon army has a way to ignite that gunpowder. That's why it's an advantage and a disadvantage. Our Joseon army can use it, but the enemy can't use it even if they capture it. So a disadvantage becomes an advantage. That's how it is. That's right. Kyang, Choi Hasten, and Lee Cheon bowed their heads and responded to Sejong's words. Sejong repeated his admiration. What a clever channel. Well, is there any other advantage to it? Yes. The biggest advantage is that production costs are greatly reduced by not using sulfur. And both saltpeter and sulfur corrode the inside of the barrel and artillery, but by removing sulfur, the intensity of corrosion is weakened. This means that the lifespan of the barrel and artillery is longer. That makes sense. There will be less smoke when you finally fire. Hearing Choi Hae-san's explanation, King Sejong stroked his beard with a face full of questions. It has so many advantages, so why is Minghua? Is it the problem of speech that I mentioned earlier? That's right. Choi Hae-san, Ikkian, and Hyang nodded in response to Sejong's question. In particular, Kyang nodded even more vigorously. Thank you, Internet. I learned about removing sulfur from black powder while searching the Internet in the 21st century. However, there was only one site with related facts, and there was no exact ratio, so the incense and craftsmen had to go through a lot of trial and error. After much trial and error, we were able to select the mixing ratio that would produce the optimal effect and the wood to be used as charcoal. And it was classified as top secret and stored in a safe built in the deepest part of the laboratory. Then how does improved gunpowder start a fire? We are using gunpowder made by His Majesty the Crown Prince. Sejong pointed out a problem in Choi Hae-san's answer. Wouldn't that make it too much of a hassle? Another gunpowder would be put between the wick and the gunpowder. The ministers who accompanied King Sejong's comment all nodded. Most of them had tattoos, but some had military service, and even if not, they had all heard at least once how to use artillery. And because I saw it in person at the last demonstration, I knew that a wick is absolutely necessary to ignite gunpowder. Choi Hae-san immediately responded to Sejong's point. We do not use wicks for ceremonial gunpowder. We use caps, copper caps. Dongwamo? When Sejong expressed doubt, Kyang quickly wrote a note on a note and held it out to Sejong. I write it like this. Is there a real thing? At King Sejong's words, Choi Hae-san moved the copper plate placed on one side of the table in front of King Sejong. The smaller one is for the Führer, and the larger one is for the artillery. King Sejong looked closely at the fairy tale on the copper plate. The barrel dragon was slightly smaller than the index finger now, and the canvas dragon appeared to be about the size of a thumb. Sejong, who was examining the piece in question, looked at Choi Hae-san. Is a demonstration possible? Already prepared. This way. Choi Hae-san guided King Sejong and the ministers to a place a little away from where the statue was placed. The place that Hae-san Choi guided us to was a space with a width of about 20 jang, about 60 m, and a length of about 150 jang, about 450 m. It's truly desolate. King Sejong expressed his appreciation after seeing the place that Choi Hae-san guided him. As King Sejong felt, the space in question was truly desolate. There were earthen walls erected on three sides, excluding where the people were standing, that appeared to be at least 2 feet high. And where people stood, bags filled with dirt were piled up to chest height to create a wall. The space inside the wall was littered with potholes. As King Sejong and the ministers settled down behind the earthen wall, Choi Hasten opened his mouth. Then let's begin the demonstration. Let's begin. At Choi Hasten's command, the craftsmen who were waiting moved the small statue to the front of the demonstration stand. There were copper plates and small wooden barrels on the table. The one on the left is Gap-style gunpowder, and the one on the right is Yule-sik gunpowder. As Choi Hasten's explanation continued, the craftsman poured gunpowder onto a copper plate with a porcelain spoon and then inserted a wick. After confirming that the wick was properly inserted, the artisans lit the wick and then stepped back. Pop. Farsi style. The wick-type gunpowder exploded with smoke, but the Yule-type gunpowder ended with only the wick burning. This time, we will use the Dongwamo using the modified Führer. Let's get started. When the order was given, the craftsman came carrying 2 guns. The artisans who transferred the gunpowder from the barrel containing the gunpowder to the gun barrel placed a wad of paper and began compacting it with a stick. After tightening the gun, the craftsman pulled the protruding metal at the back of the barrel and then inserted the copper hat. After completing all work, the craftsman placed the barrel of the gun tightly under their right armpit, then held the string connected to the rack in their left hand and stood facing the opposite wall. Bampa, 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 puff. As the craftsman shouted 3 loud slogans and pulled the strings in unison, the 2 barrels fired fire at the same time. Oh. Who? As the 2 guns fired fireworks, the subjects let out exclamations of exclamation. Sejong looked back at the scent. So this is why you don't use wicks? I guess there are fewer restrictions than when you use wicks. That's right. Your hard work has truly been great. Sejong looked at the scent with an expression of wonder. However, Sejong immediately put on a stern face and asked a question. You said the name of the gunpowder you made was Pokyun. Could it be that precious silver is used? No, we use mercury. Of course, mercury is precious, but it is easier to obtain than silver, and since it is used only for ignition, it costs less than expected. But, then you're lucky. Sejong's face brightened at Hyang's answer that it would cost less. Either way, gunpowder was an item that consumed an enormous amount of wealth. Sejong, whose expression was greatly relaxed, turned his head towards the demonstration site. I also want to know about the other gunpowder that the Crown Prince made. General. Yes, Your Majesty. Bring me huge breasts. Yes. Following Choi Hae-san's order, the craftsman came in carefully carrying a small wooden box. Tilt the box so you can see inside. The craftsman tilted the box so that King Sejong and his subjects could see inside. In the center of the box filled with sawdust was a small porcelain bottle. Choi Hae-san took his bottle out of the box, uncorked it, and tilted it slightly toward the empty ground. Review. A drop of milk fell from the spout of the bottle onto the ground, and at that moment, a loud explosion occurred. OMG. Beg money. As the ministers were startled by the unexpected explosion, Choi Hae-san introduced them with a mischievous smile. This is huge breasts. Amazing. Amazing. Crown Prince, this is truly amazing. It is truly a piece worthy of the name Kokyu. General, then how is its power? It is incomparable to the gunpowder used by our Joseon army. It would be worthy of saying that it is the difference between heaven and earth. Get ready. Yes, General. Craftsmen prepared a demonstration to compare the power of black gunpowder and heavy oil. Here comes the Lee Chonton, which has been made thick to test its power. The amount of gunpowder used is 1/4 Nyang, approximately 9 G, in both cases. First, there is the Yule-sik gunpowder. The craftsman poured 1/4 tael of gunpowder into the barrel and fixed the barrel on a tripod that had been previously installed on the floor. Next, an iron stopper that looked like a large mushroom was placed on the muzzle of the Führer, which was tilted toward the front. The craftsman, who pulled the lock and put the Donghua hat in place, stepped back and shouted loudly. Fire! 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 Pop! With a loud explosion, the iron stopper flew in a parabola and fell to the ground. The craftsman began counting the units by retrieving the string connected to the iron stopper. 1 step, 2 steps. Choi Hae-san quickly explained to King Sejong. You can check the distance traveled by coloring in steps. Is it? 50 steps. About 60 m. Now let's experiment with huge breasts. At Choi Hae-san's gesture, the craftsman began preparing for the second launch. The hands of the craftsman who put the Führer to sleep were extremely careful. You do it very carefully? Kang immediately answered King Sejong's question. Here comes a very picky guy. However, bang bang, bubble bang, bubble bang. While we were talking, the craftsman who had finished preparing pulled the string connected to the rack. Bang! With a loud explosion louder and sharper than that of gunpowder, the iron stopper rose into the sky and began to fly far away. The craftsman who recovered the iron stopper that had flown far away shouted the distance in a loud voice. 110 steps, about 132 m. King Sejong was startled by his father-in-law's shout. It flew more than twice as far? That's right. As its temperament is difficult, its power is outstanding. Sejong clicked his tongue when he saw Hyang's facial expression as he answered. SK. Judging by your expression, it seems like it's not the right thing to use easily. That's right. Given the current situation in Joseon, the huge milk itself is an item that cannot be used. This. Sejong couldn't hide his disappointment at Hyang's answer and quenched his appetite. It's a shame. I agree. The ministers who listened to Sejong and Hyang's answers also had expressions similar to Sejong's. The crown prince they know seems to prioritize performance the most, but surprisingly, he is also someone who considers production costs. However, the fact that the crown prince did not mention the cost meant that the government could bear the cost of production. However, the crown prince now commented that it was an unusable item. How on earth are you so picky that you say that? It's extremely tricky. Hyang explained the reason to Sejong. First of all, production itself is impossible in spring or summer when the days are hot. During the synthesis process, high heat is generated, and there is a high possibility that it will explode or catch fire due to the high heat. For that reason, he was only able to attempt synthesis when winter began, and he had to use a large amount of ice from the ice storage. Very careful care must be taken during the synthesis process. Because a highly concentrated acid solution is used, protective gear must be worn to protect the skin of the hands and face. There must also be a ventilation system there. If even the slightest impurity enters the product, the risk of self-destruction increases significantly. For this reason, fragrances had to go through numerous refining processes before and after synthesis. Storage is not easy. It is extremely sensitive to shock and explodes immediately if the containers collide with each other or are shaken violently during transport. If lightning strikes nearby, it explodes immediately. As explained above, if impurities are not removed properly, it will self-destruct over time. It must be stored in a cool place due to the problem of self-destruction. In the case of incense, a burrow was dug in Mokyeoksan Mountain, Namsan Mountain, to create a storage area. For this reason, it is something that can never be used on its own. What a damn thing. At Hyang's explanation, Sejong swore without even realizing it. However, this time his ministers also agreed. This is truly a damn thing. The power is really good, but it's because the personality is so dirty. Leaving aside his regret over the huge breasts, Sejong moved on to the next step. The next gunpowder to be introduced is cotton powder. Cotton powder? Is it called cotton powder because cotton cloth is used? No, cotton cloth is used for gunpowder. Sejong, who remembered Choi Hae-san's explanation when he first saw him, looked in disbelief. The same was true for the ministers. Making gunpowder from cotton cloth? Of course, the cotton cloth catches fire. Well, not only King Sejong, but also the ministers were muttering in suspicion. Choi Hae-san picked up a piece of cotton cloth lying on the table with tongs. Light it. Yes, General. Pop. Egg money. Oh my. As soon as the craftsman set fire to the cloth instantly burned with an explosion and turned into ash. Choi Hae-san, who was laughing at the ministers who were surprised by the binge drinking and started a game, opened his mouth. It is made using well-woven cotton cloth and various types of acid solution. As you can see, it has strong firepower. And there is the most important thing. Starting with that huge gunpowder, it is cotton powder, and Diagap-style gunpowder is smokeless gunpowder. It's lead-free. Does it mean there's no smoke? To be precise, it means paying less. In the subsequent demonstration, cotton powder was shown to be weaker than heavy oil, but sufficiently stronger than black gunpowder. The last thing I'm going to show you is Diagap-style gunpowder. Diagap-sik? What is the reason for naming it that way? In response to Sejong's question, Choi Hae-san looked at the scent. Following Choi Hae-san's gaze, King Sejong and the minister's eyes were all focused on Hyang. Hyang scratched the back of his head and answered, I named it because I thought it was a virtue to ensure that all soldiers who use gunpowder could use it comfortably, and I thought it was all thanks to Abba Mama that it was possible to make it like that. It's a little embarrassing, but it's a pretty good name. King Sejong and the ministers nodded at Hyang's explanation, but Hyang had to smile bitterly. I found out about this gunpowder through an internet search, and since it is a German manufacturing method, I can never say that it was taken from Diakgok, the name used to call Dolial. Choi Hae-san continued his explanation. This Diet-Gap-style gunpowder is a mixture of cotton powder, milk, and persimmon oil glycerin in a certain ratio. Sejong looked surprised at Choi Hasen's explanation and pointed out the problem. Mixed with colossal breasts? Didn't I hear earlier that colossal breasts are extremely difficult to use and cannot be used? Cotton powder and persimmon oil neutralize that property. Is that so? But cotton powder is white, so why is this gunpowder black? It's because it's coated with graphite. No, it's wrapped around the outside. In the subsequent power demonstration, the Diet-Gap-style gunpowder showed as much power as the bomb. King Sejong, who saw the power, applauded and loved it. How wonderful! Wonderful! When Sejong liked it so much, King became proud. As expected, Diet-Gak. However, this was a misremembering of the fragrance. The combination of scents I remember was British, not German. To be precise, it was a combination of cordite MD. King Sejong, who was very pleased with the newly created gunpowder, looked back at his ministers. Now that we have such good gunpowder, why not mass produce it? In response to Sejong's suggestion, Wang He asked Hyang, what are the production costs? It cost about 30% more than the cost of producing the same weight of gunpowder. However, even if you put in only half of the gunpowder, it has more power. Wang He nodded to Hyang's answer and offered advice to King Sejong. They say it costs a lot, but it can be replaced by using less quantity, so it would be better to mass produce it. Captain Wu Yuijong is right. When the ministers agreed, King Sejong looked at Hyang and Choi Hasen. Prepare for mass production of Diet-Gap-style gunpowder. Hyang responded to Sejong's command with a puzzled expression. I'm sorry to tell you, but under the current situation in Joseon, mass production of Diet-Gap-style gunpowder is impossible. Why? Why? King Sejong and his ministers screamed at Hyang's statement that mass production is impossible. In particular, Sejong listened to Hyang with an angry expression. Why is it impossible? Because it is impossible under the current situation in Joseon. So, why is it impossible? This is no different from what you keep saying. Wasn't it your belief that we should find a way to make it possible, not impossible? I am devastated, but it is impossible in the current situation in Joseon. The reason is, you bastard! Sejong screamed, but the scent only made a bitter expression. One of the most frustrating things is getting a dance taken away. But the situation is shit. What can you do? Wang He, who had been watching Sejong unable to control his anger, joined the conversation. Your Majesty, please calm your anger. There will be twists and turns in this. Huh. Sejong took a deep breath at Wang He's words. Sejong, who managed to control his anger, opened his mouth, glaring at his scent. Explain why. Yes, Abama. Let me be clear. It is possible to produce Diet-Gap-style gunpowder. However, mass production is not possible. Why? In response to Sejong's question, Kang explained the reason. To make Diet-Gap-style gunpowder, high-purity acetic acid and sulfuric acid are required. With the current situation in Joseon, it is difficult to obtain large quantities of saltpeter and sulfur. There is also a problem with comedones. The cotton cloth, which is the main material of Diet-Gap-style gunpowder, must be high-quality cotton cloth without lint. However, looking at the current situation in Joseon, it is so bad that the 5 sumpo, called jiampo, is only used for paying taxes, and the 3 sumpo or 4 sumpo is used as currency. As explained above, skilled craftsmen are needed to use high-purity acid. Of course, as you can see from the Chamber of Commerce and the military discipline, there are skilled craftsmen. However, for mass production, the number is too small. In the case of Hokyu, the main ingredient in Diet-Gap-style gunpowder, another problem is added. The main ingredient of Bokyu is persimmon oil. Why? Persimmon oil is also a product that must be imported. No, it's a product from Joseon. But why is it a problem? This is because the main ingredients of Gamyu are pork fat and beef tallow. King Sejong and the ministers had to sigh at the same time at Hyang's answer. To make nitroglycerin, a large amount of glycerin was needed. However, in the current situation where there is no such thing as a petrochemical industry in the 21st century, the method that Fragrance could choose was to extract glycerin during the process of making soap. However, supply of raw materials was a problem. The easiest thing to think of was pig fat, and pigs had a body fat percentage of 15%. Mathematically speaking, if a pig weighs 100 kilograms, it has 15 kilograms of fat. Even if the fat and other fats were recovered as much as possible during the butchering process, 100% recovery was not possible, and the amount of glycerin extracted through the saponification process was even smaller. To put it simply, even if everyone in Joseon ate pork for 3 meals a day, it would be impossible to supply enough glycerin for military use. Kiang, who was twirling the pen and examining the results, shook his head. Whether in the 21st century or now, the economic feasibility of eco-friendly natural products is a mess. Wow, long live the petrochemical industry, even if it is the main culprit of environmental destruction. Long live the heavy chemical industry. It's really unfortunate. I wish I didn't know that gunpowder with such excellent performance could be made. I wish I didn't know. The ministers also nodded to King Sejong's lament. That means giving up. Abama, giving up on national defense leads to ruin. In response to Hyang's rebuttal, Sejong screamed. Who doesn't know that? But what can we do if the situation in Joseon is not helping? What is the reason why Abama wears a police suit? Isn't it to overcome the difficult situation in Joseon? Sejong froze in response to Hyang's protest. Looking at King Sejong like that, King felt the veins in his neck rise. At this very moment, starting with Soja, military officers including General Choi Hae-san and General Likian, and craftsmen, starting with Jang Byeoljwa, are struggling hard to find a solution. Abama, Soja believes that survival is a challenge. Survival is a challenge to death. Giving up is death. Crown Prince Li Hyang. For Soja, the word giving up is a word he doesn't know. You are right. Sejong trembled with passion. The moment Gwaine ascended to the throne, I decided to do everything for the rise of Joseon. You reminded me of something I had forgotten for a while, and you are truly a loyal subject. Sirs, listen. Collect your scattered hearts again. Seongjang, risk your lives to make it a success. Like King Sejong, the ministers, caught up in passion, responded with one voice. I will sacrifice my life to obey your orders. Later, the ministers, exhausted from overwork, all muttered. At that time, we did an audit of Area 51 for no reason. What kind of snout this guy has? As Sejong mentioned earlier, Kang never gave up on mass production of glycerin. One day, while I was busy, I was looking for a possible solution whenever I had time, and Hyang, who had been sleeping in the room, suddenly woke up. Cooking oil. That's great, my head. You paid for the meal again. The next day, as soon as the sun dawned, Kiang ran to Area 51 and found Choi Hae-san. Meanwhile, Choi Hae-san must have been looking for incense as well, and as soon as he saw the incense, he came running with a bright face. Your Majesty the Crown Prince, I've been waiting for you. General, I think I found a way to gon you. The director also has something in mind. When I realized that the two of us were looking for the same topic, I felt a moment of embarrassment. The fragrance that organized the new color opened its mouth. General, please speak first. You first, it's okay. Choi Hae-san was the first to open his mouth at Hyang's concession. The director's idea was to use soybeans. I thought the same thing myself. Hyang and Choi Hae-san immediately made soybean oil and began experimenting. After confirming the results of the experiment, Hyang and Choi Hae-san put their heads together. Do you think it's okay? Yes, Your Majesty. Let's report to Abama. Yes. After receiving the report, King Sejong looked at the ministers with great joy. The Crown Prince has made a contribution again. That's right. With this, we can further strengthen Joseon's national defense. I bow to you. I'm crying out loud. In the process of supplying soybeans from soybean fields connected to the cattle ranch installed on Neo-Bolsium Island were used first. As a result of the test, it was confirmed that the soybean waste from which the oil was extracted was okay to use as feed for cows and pigs. However, since the soybeans harvested from the soybean fields belonging to the ranch could not satisfy all the demands, Joseon earned the title of the first country in world history to officially recycle resources. The Joseon dynasty's efforts to obtain oil were a war against the kitchen. Pork fat and beef fat are widely used in cooking because they give a savory taste when baking or frying food. For this reason, the government paid money to collect pork and uji, and this led to the creation of the term jajangan following the term dongjangan. It was because of beans that the government began its war against the kitchen in earnest. Soybeans were one of the important foods in Joseon at the time. In addition, the demand for soybeans was enormous as it was a country that made and consumed a lot of soybean paste and soy sauce. To solve this situation, King Sejong came up with the best move. When farmers who volunteer to migrate to the northern frontier build soybean fields, the entire harvest will be purchased from the government. Then, we will be able to solve the migrants' portability problem and the problem of raw material supply. I follow your orders. This method led to a different result from the original history. The number of farmers willing to migrate north increased significantly. Through these various attempts, Joseon secured a way to significantly increase the production of Diakap-style gunpowder. However, Kiang's expression did not brighten much. Considering the amount we are consuming now, the increasing amount is not the answer. The amount used by the military has increased, but the amount used by the private sector is also significant. Kiang, who was frowning as he looked at the reports from the Ministry of Public Works and Communications that were piled up on one side of the desk and fretting about the lack of gunpowder, muttered as he looked at the world map hanging on the wall. Is it the South after all? Have you seen all of this? King Sejong, who awoke after an argument over gunpowder, looked at the incense with a somewhat regretful expression. Kiang shook her head in response to Sejong's question. No, the most important things remain. The most important things? First, let me show you the Führer, General. Yes, sir. Hello. Call the Führer soldiers. Yes, General. After a while, a group of Führer soldiers entered the demonstration hall. Ha-2. Ha-2. Stay in your place. Turn left. Chak-chak. At the command of the leading military officer, the Führer soldiers, who placed the long barrel on their right shoulder, moved in unison and faced King Sejong. Hold the gun. Insect. At the command of the commander, the Führer soldiers simultaneously performed a military ceremony. King Sejong, who returned the military courtesy of the soldiers, heaped praise on General Choi Hae-san and Hyang. Looking at the soldiers' unerring composure and moderation, I can see that they are no ordinary elite. The efforts of the Crown Prince, in the general, seem to be visible. Truly elite soldiers are coming. It's been quite a while since Joseon entered the court, but I haven't seen such elite soldiers very often. Even the ministers did not spare praise for King Sejong's praise. The faces of the Führer soldiers who received praise from King Sejong and his ministers were full of pride. Kiang's face, who saw it from the side, was also full of pride. How much effort did I put in on formal training? When satisfactory rifles were produced in a certain quantity, Kiang requested King Sejong to provide soldiers and officers. When the military officers and soldiers arrived, Hyang could not hide his disappointment. They clearly said that the people selected from the city council were part of the training center. I think it's true that they are elite, compared to the military life he experienced in the 21st century and the armies of European powers in the 19th century and the US soldiers during the Civil War that he saw through movies. The discipline and eliteness of the soldiers he saw before his eyes were significantly lacking. Kiang, who was contemplating with his head crossed, clicked his tongue. SK, I have no choice. I have to roll with it. So the soldiers were first mobilized to build lodgings for themselves, and to build a large-scale test site to test various weapons. I thought you came because of military issues. As soon as they arrived, the soldiers who were holding shovels instead of weapons were a little confused, but there were no complaints. This was because the scent was just as amazing as eating it. Pork and beef were served at least once every 3 days. The soldiers were excited and had a meat feast. Meanwhile, an unusual object caught the soldiers' attention. A fire plate placed on top of a brazier. There were grooves on all sides of the thick cast iron utensil, and the oil that came out as the meat was grilled flowed along the grooves and collected in the bowl. And when the meal was over, the dishes were headed straight to the artisans' workshops. While the soldiers were mobilized for construction, Kiang clashed with Choi Hae-san, General Ikian, and military officers from the training center. They created names for each department of the newly created president and created commands for formal training. Are these drills, movements, and slogans that you ordered as formal training really useful? We are already doing similar training. The military officers at the training center who first heard Hyang's words doubted its necessity. The military battle they experienced was a clash between groups. The tactic to win such a battle was to not break ranks until the end. And the Joseon military also faithfully provided related training. So that disgraceful act occurred during the conquest of Tsushima Island? The military officers remained silent at Hyang's point. At the time of the conquest of Tsushima Island, Lee Jong-mu decided to attack their base in order to destroy the Japanese pirates who did not give up resistance. For this attack, Lee Jong-mu drew lots to decide who would go among the left and right armies. As a result of the lottery, Park Sil's left army landed and began its advance, but the enemy's surprise attack caused the battle line to collapse, resulting in about 180 deaths. It was a natural result that Hyang, who obtained and read the report at the time, was outraged and said, there was no strategy or tactics. Strategy aside, from a tactical perspective, it was an operation to land the left army and then push forward alone without even properly establishing additional operations for how to respond when faced with difficulties due to an enemy's surprise attack or other problems. In the end, because Hyang's point made sense, the military officers conducted research on ritual training and bayonet techniques together with Hyang. King Sejong, who praised the elite of the Führer's soldiers, got to the point. Is the Führer carrying on their shoulders the newly created Führer? Hyang immediately answered King Sejong's question. Yes, that's right. I named him Gap Sik Jang Chang Tong, Jashir Chang Tong Tong. In response to Hyang's response, King Sejong stroked his beard and expressed his impressions. Chang Chung-young, it's a fitting name. But King Sejong's eyes were fixed on Chung Tong's shiny gun barrel. Sejong, looking at the silver glittering barrel of General Zhang's gun, turned his head to Hyang. It's not copper? That's right. It's made of wrought iron. Suso arrow? Huang He, who had been listening to the conversation between Sejong and Hyang, immediately intervened. Jiaha, copper is expensive, but Suwuso is also expensive. Sejong raised his hand to interrupt Huang He. Stop, the crown prince probably had something on his mind, so he used Suwuso. It's not too late to talk about that later. I follow your orders. King Sejong, who stopped Huang He from speaking, gave an order to Choi Hasten. I want to see the power. Yes, your majesty. Choi Hasten, who received the order, gestured to the craftsman standing next to him. The craftsman who saw Choi Hasen's gesture immediately came carrying a plate the size of a human torso. The board covered with red cloth had rows of vertices sewn into it. Hasten Choi pointed to the board with his baton and began to explain. This is the parietal plate that will be used as a target. Compared to the parietal armor that is actually used, the thickness of the iron plate has been increased by 1 ri and strengthened to 4 ri, approximately 1.3 millimeters. Is it? Place the target. Yes, General. The craftsman carried the target to the other side of the demonstration site. Upon seeing the sight of a target being set up a long way away from where the Führer soldiers were stationed, King Sejong called General Choi Hae-san. General, how far is it? It's about 250 steps, about 300 meters. Who? Sejong's eyes began to shine with admiration. Meanwhile, the craftsman who had finished setting up the target gave hand signals, rushed to the side, and jumped into the ditch created under the earthen wall. The commander, who saw the craftsman's hand signals, shouted to the Führer soldiers, "Put up the gun." At the command of the commander, the Führer soldiers placed the rifles they were carrying on their shoulders on the floor. 3 guns, Shitong. Lead gunpowder. Welfare. Songja, Songzer. Yanja, Qianzer. After completing the entire process at the command of the commander, the riflemen returned to their upright shooting positions, and the commander gave an order. Gun in front. Copper hat. The Führer soldiers lifted the long barrel, pulled the rack halfway, and then inserted a copper hat filled with wide silver into the stone. Pull the gun. Aim. The Führermen fully pulled back the half-pulled racket, put their left foot forward, tilted their bodies, placed the butt on their shoulder, and aimed at a target standing in the distance. Bongpa. Puff poop. In an instant, cloudy smoke and fireworks appeared and disappeared into thin air. As soon as, after finishing shooting, the Führer soldiers returned to their standing shooting positions, and the craftsmen who had hidden themselves in the ditch retrieved the target and returned. That's amazing. It's amazing power. King Sejong and his ministers could not hide their surprise at the recovered target board. There were 9 holes surrounding the target plate. Hyang and Choi Hae-san's faces were filled with pride as they saw King Sejong and the ministers examining the target board with surprised faces. This is truly amazing. I know that the power of the Chung Tong is strong, but its range is far short of that of a bow. However, this Chung Tong has a range similar to that of a bow, and its power is incomparable, so it is truly the strongest. It's a weapon. The craftsman worked hard. Hyang humbly responded to King Sejong's praise. Choi Hae-san, who heard Hyang's answer from the side, nodded vigorously. There were small tears in Choi Hae-san's eyes as he nodded. Sejong looked back at Choi Hae-san's strong reaction. Sejong sighed when he saw Hyang's face smiling brightly. How much trouble did you put the craftsman through? General Choi, please tell me the process by which this president was completed. Yes, Your Majesty. So, the process of making a Jangchangtong began with making a tool specifically for making the iron body of the Jangchangtong. In order to make a Führer out of scrap, you have to use a special anvil as well. In accordance with the protest order, craftsmen made a special anvil using mulberry iron, high-carbon steel. While a typical anvil had a flat top, the special anvil had a long groove in the shape of a semi-cylindrical pillar whose thickness gradually tapered from a large, semi-cylindrical pillar to a semi-cylindrical pillar slightly larger than the thickness of the target barrel. After the anvil was completed, what Xiang ordered was an iron core made of mulberry iron, slightly thicker than the thickness of the president. After the dedicated tools were created, King guided the next process. Following the guidance of the head of the military, including the late head, began rolling siwusiapin of appropriate sizes. After the iron plate was properly dried, the iron core was inserted in the center and the steel plate was hammered and rolled on a special anvil. As the iron plate dried and the two ends came into contact with each other, the craftsman sprinkled a mixture of iron powder and charcoal powder on the touching area and placed it in the kiln. The iron powder mixed with charcoal powder melted in the hot heat of the kiln, filling the wrinkles in the rounded iron plate. Once the gap was completely filled, the field leaders smoothed it out with a file and at the same time checked whether it was properly filled. Once it was filled without any problems, the round column was beaten to make it appropriately angular. This was to make work easier by fixing the barrel during the subsequent processing process. Finally, after heating it in a kiln and cooling it by burying it in ashes, the inside was straightened and smoothed with a drill designed by Xiang. Once the inside was smooth and it was confirmed that both the outside and inside of the barrel were straight without bending, the craftsman filed the barrel to give it an octagonal cross-section. Afterwards, I dug out a female screw in the back and inserted a stopper with a male screw. There was a part for inserting the copper hat into this part. The work didn't end there. The trigger, diaphragm, and gun barrel are combined in a wooden body made by a wood craftsman. The trigger, sight, and scale made by a craftsman are attached. The spout at the end of the beak is made of solid iron and has protrusions protruding on both sides. The parts are covered. The hardships began from then on. The barrel of the gun in the drawing produced by Xiang did not have rifling lines. This was the intention of the set. There will be more and more things to make, test, and do in the future, but I can't do it all, right? Once the 5 prototypes were completed, Kang began full-scale performance testing with Choi Hae-sun and Ikian. First, let's find out how much gunpowder it can withstand. Yes, sir. The previous president Lee put in 1 niang. Shall we start with half a niang? It seems appropriate. Choi Hae-sun, Ikian, and the craftsman began the test by filling half a niang of gunpowder and bullets. For safety, the barrel was fixed to a fixture. A string was attached to the trigger, and the people hid behind the protective wall. Vampo, Bompa, Bompa, Pop. The test, which filled Area 51 with heavy drinking, ended with the person enduring up to 1.5 taels of gunpowder. Considering the purpose of using this furor, I don't think it's necessary to spend 2 niang. That's right. Then let's try it with explosives. In the subsequent test, President Jiang withstood up to 1.5 taels of silver-type gunpowder. After confirming the results, Jiang changed the test items. Then, let's check what the optimal amount of gunpowder is. It is said that the distance at which Li Chengtong killed the Jurchen tribe wearing 2-pack armor was 40 paces, approximately 50 meters, so let's use that as a standard. Yes, sir. This time, the plan was to reduce the amount of gunpowder. The result of the test was 2 dongs, about 7.5 g, of explosives. The bullet fired from the long gun barrel cleanly penetrated the 4 fixed steel plate used as the target. After checking the results, Qiang looked back at Choi Hae-san and Ikian. Looking at its power, it seems like it can be killed from a greater distance, right? The farther away, the better, right? It's obvious. Then shall we see if we can do 50 steps? Yes, sir. Choi Hae-san answered excitedly. In the test conducted in this way, a long gun loaded with 2 bucks of explosives penetrated the target up to 70 paces, approximately 85 meters. At longer distances, the bullets reached the target, but none of them hit the target even though more than 20 rounds were fired. 70s is unexpected, isn't it? Now I guess I'll have to throw some rice cakes about Kangxian, right? Although the results were better than expected, Qiang had no intention of stopping, and from then on, Choi Hae-sun, Ikian, and the craftsmen began to find their work no longer enjoyable. Looking at the loading process of the general and the president, it seems like too much time is wasted using 3 guns and firing guns. Let's try it without the 3 guns and firing guns. But if that process isn't done, there's a risk of bullets leaking out. Why not make bullets tailored to the Führer instead? Choi Hae-san, who thought about Qiang's opinion for a moment, nodded. It seems worth testing. Qiang planned to force people to experience trial and error based on the content of videos they saw on the internet. In the experiment conducted in this way, Jiang Chongtong fired 5 rounds and caused a problem. It's difficult to prepare to fire again because the gunpowder residue is stuck. Okay. After all, I have to do King Sejong. However, Qiang shook his head. General, think about it. Can you afford to fire 3 guns when cavalrymen on horses that run faster than people are coming at you with all their might? That's true, but Choi Hasten, Ikkian, and the craftsmen put their heads together and began to find a solution. However, people did not easily come up with the idea of steel wire. Should I get involved in this again? One rainy day when I was wondering whether incense would be involved, a craftsman who had been staring blankly out the window suddenly got up from his seat. Ah, what's going on? How about digging a groove? Dig a groove? The father-in-law explained, pointing to the ground with his finger. Look at that ditch. Doesn't the stagnant water flow through that ditch? Wouldn't the same thing be true for a spark of gunpowder? If you cut a long groove inside the barrel, wouldn't the debris flow out along with the flow of flame? At the father-in-law's words, Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon looked at the incense. Kiang nodded. It might be worth a try. According to the decision of the township, 7 additional rifles were produced. Let's compare the number of grooves made with 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15 grooves to the ones that were not dug. Yes. The order was received, but the craftsman had new concerns. How do I dig a groove? After staying up all night and thinking about it, a special tool was made, and the craftsman dug from 3 to 15 barrels in the long gun barrel. In the test that followed, Choi Hasten, Ikkian, and the artisans faced a new problem. As the number of holes in the barrel increases, the power decreases. It's only natural. The more grooves there are, the more force there will be to leak along those grooves. When Lee Cheon pointed out the cause, Choi Hasten muttered with an embarrassed expression. Is say gun the only answer? What are the exact results? Lee Cheon answered Hyang's question, while flipping through the book where he wrote the results. Up to 6, there is a small decrease in power, but a lot of residue is added. From 9, the residue is gradually reduced, but the power begins to drop sharply. Everyone shook their heads at Lee Cheon's answer. Should I go to line 9? The problem is that from then on, the power declines to the point where it can be seen. Then is only 6 lines the answer? That also has the problem of debris. Just when Hyang, who couldn't bear to think about problems that couldn't be solved at the same time, was about to open his mouth, Jang Yong-sil opened his mouth. Then how about twisting the groove? Knitting the groove? At Jang Yong-sil's remarks, all people's attention was focused on Jang Yong-sil. Hyang, who was watching from behind, clenched his fist under the desk. Mr. Nice? Hyang quickly adjusted her expression and gave an order to Jang Yong-sil. Jang Byoljwa, please try to explain properly. Yes, sir. So, wouldn't the length increase if the grooves were rotated like the screws we use? In that case, even if there were 6 toms, the length would be long enough for the dross to escape, and the gunpowder would explode due to the rotation. Wouldn't that force escape right away? Jang Yong-sil's explanation fell into silence in the conference room. While pondering for a while what Jang Yong-sil meant, Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon shouted at the same time. That's it. That's it. I think the right answer would be to twist the crown prince. Hyang came to a conclusion based on Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon's words. Then let's do it. That day, as she went to bed, Hyang grumbled with a tired expression. The road to Kamseoncheon is so long and arduous. To explain the concept of surface area in terms of length, what is the understanding that allows one to clearly understand it? Are all humans living in this era monsters? A decision was made to twist the grooves dug inside the barrel, but problems arose there again. How many laps will you spin? As people were once again confused about this issue, the Sen had to come forward again. Make a prototype in half-turn increments, from half a turn to 2 turns. I follow your orders. And the craftsman had to stay up all night again to make a new rifle barrel. A decision was made to dig a large steel wire inside the Jangchom Tong, but the craftsmen were faced with another problem. Which direction should I turn? After thinking about the direction of rotation of the steel wire, Kyang came to a conclusion. When looking from the muzzle of a gun, wouldn't it be okay to make one in the direction of rotation of that clock hand, and one in the opposite direction? At those words, Choi Hasten opened the tablet and started calculating. There are 4 types of rotations, from half a turn to 2 turns, and 2 types of rotation directions. There are at least 5 types because we need to check the deviation. Then, there are 40 types. It will take some time. You have to try. At Hyang's words, the craftsman present let out a small sigh. However, no one complained. The work was difficult, but firing the barrel was surprisingly refreshing, and checking the results was fun in its own way. Of course, Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon, who were caught in the middle, were more trouble than fun. In subsequent tests, all 40 guns showed performance that exceeded expectations. There was no problem even if more than 5 shots were fired from all 40 guns, and there was no significant decrease in power. However, in the process of analyzing the test results, an unexpected result emerged. The accuracy rate was higher than expected. In response to the unexpected results, Hae-sun Choi submitted a report and made a suggestion. Until then, it was said that if you fired 20 shots at a distance of 70 steps, you would be lucky if you got 5 shots. However, in this test, all 40 arrows hit all targets at a distance of 70 steps. Research on this is needed. Okay, let's do it. Get ready. Yes, sir. Yang clenched his fists as he watched Choi Hae-san's back excitedly leaving. Oh yeah, I asked. To find the cause of the unexpected result and a way to exploit it. Hae-sun Choi, Cheon Lee, and the craftsmen fired hundreds of bullets. Through that process, military officers and craftsmen learned several facts. The rotation speed of the groove cut inside the barrel was 1.5 revolutions to achieve the best performance. When tied as tightly as possible to the fixture and fired, the bullet hit a target up to 500 steps, approximately 600 meters away. However, this is literally hitting the target, not a spectator. The arrow is in the middle of the target. However, this does not mean that the distance fired from the barrel has increased. Regardless of whether there is a rifling or not, 2 dongs, approximately 7.5 g, of powder-type gunpowder can fire 5 dongs, approximately 17 g, of bullets up to 800 paces, approximately 960 m. If hit from a distance of 500 paces, the bullet did not penetrate the iron plate used as a target. However, looking at the crooked state of the iron sword, it is assumed that it can cause serious injury to the enemy. The direction of rotating the groove must be consistent with the direction in which the barrel body and stopper are tightened. If you do the opposite, the more you fire, the more the gun barrel and stopper will loosen. Sir, how about experimenting with increasing the amount of gunpowder? Choi Hae-sun and Lee Cheon showed enthusiasm, but Yang shook his head. It is likely that we will repeat the problems of the previous president. Rather than that, let's organize these results that we have obtained. Yes, sir. Yang, Choi Hae-sun, and Ikian classified the survey results as follows. Maximum range, literally, the farthest distance traveled when fired with specified gunpowder and bullets. The bullet has almost no power. Maximum effective range, the distance at which a hit of at least 30% or more can be expected when aiming and shooting. However, the power must be maintained to inflict a certain level of injury to the target. Effective range, the maximum distance at which trained Führer soldiers can hit the target when aiming and shooting. According to the classification by Yang, Choi Hae-sun, and Ikian, the performance of the rotary groove Chunong was a maximum range of 800 steps, a maximum effective range of 350 steps, and an effective range of 250 steps. While Yang, Choi Hae-sun, and Ikian were classifying the results and expressing great satisfaction, the Institute's officials and craftsmen were struggling to solve the homework Yang had given them. Analyze why President Chang's performance suddenly improved. If you look at the test results we have done so far, the only reason why performance improved so dramatically was by rotating the groove. But why did we get this result? That's right. That's the problem. The most likely suspect was the rotating groove, but officials and craftsmen could not easily figure out what the groove was doing. While the officials and craftsmen were pondering, the military commander's poet, Sir Run, a craftsman who makes arrows, expressed his opinion. Isn't that groove what makes the bullet spin? It makes the bullet spin? Tell me more. The poet explained in more detail, even using hand gestures. When the arrows attached the feathers to the arrows, they attached them slightly out of alignment. Then, the arrows that leave the string fly around and around like this. What happens then is that the arrows fly straight. They are less prone to side winds. That's right. Okay. The officials and craftsmen who thought it was plausible began testing it with various sizes of bullets. As a result, it was confirmed that the bullet engaging the protruding part of the rotating groove rotates, resulting in an improvement in accuracy. All of the knowledge discovered in this way and the data obtained during the testing process were written down in documents and were carefully stored in a safe located in the deepest part of the same class. This is a top secret connected to our country's national defense, so everyone must pay attention to confidentiality. The officials and artisans responded with one voice to the warning of the village. I will keep each bone in mind. This confidentiality was maintained despite the audit taking place. While Choi Hae-san explained to King Sejong the process of creating the president, he did not reveal the part about this rotating groove until the end. When Sejong found out about this, it was after the audit was over. Choi Hae-san, who met King Sejong alone, submitted a written report. and King Sejong nodded after reading the document. I understand why the crown prince and his ministers kept silent until the end. If that's the case, Gwaine should also follow. Merchant ship, bring the brazier. King Sejong threw the Reed report into the furnace and burned it. Meanwhile, while Choi Hasten reported to King Sejong in writing, King muttered while looking at the related records. If rumors spread about President Chang's performance, it will definitely be leaked. Whether it is captured during a battle, stolen, or sold for bribes, they will copy it with excitement. However, unless they know the principles and try to improve it, at times, Joseon must be one step ahead. That's why we're acting like this. Again, you have made a truly excellent weapon. The Führer soldiers will use our planning to unify with this Gapsijang Führer. When Huang He tried to say something in response to Choi Hasten's words, King Sejong raised his hand and covered Huang He's mouth. It would be okay if we deploy sequentially starting from the northern area right away. Good. Let's review that plan. I am devastated. I am devastated. When King Sejong came to a positive conclusion regarding the production and deployment of Gapsijang Chongtan, Kiang, Choi Hae-san, Ikkian, and other officials gathered in unison and shouted, "This is a ruin." Okay, has the Führer decided on this? No. There is another type of commander. This is the mounted commander. Who? When Sejong showed interest, Choi Hae-san made a gesture. At Choi Hae-san's gesture, a military officer wearing blue armor came in. The color of the armor. Here comes the new armor we developed together. I'll explain later. Is that so? Then let's proceed. Choi Hae-san continued speaking in response to King Sejong's command. What I'm going to show you this time is a gap-type horse-mounted rifle. As soon as Choi Hae-san finished speaking, the military officer opened the lid of the long leather pouch worn on his right waist, took out a silver gun barrel, folded his arms, and held it with the muzzle pointing upward. I want to take a closer look. Yes, Your Majesty. In response to King Sejong's order, the military attaché placed the gun on both hands and held it out politely. King Sejong, who was looking around at the barrel handed to him by the military officer, stopped at the round iron barrel hanging in the center of the barrel. 6 holes? Is this gun barrel capable of firing 6 bullets? I'll buy it back. King Sejong, who was greatly surprised, looked back at the scent. Looking at Sejong's surprised eyes, King smiled and answered, "This is one of Area 51's masterpieces." Of course, the design was original. What was in the hands of the military officer was the Colt 1860 arm, whose caliber was modified to suit the situation of the Joseon military. This was a product that was being prepared as a successor to the Kentucky rifle when Hyang lived in the 21st century. In response to Hyang's response, King Sejong returned the president to the military officer. "I want to see how you shoot." Yes. In the following demonstration, the military attaché hit all 6 shots on a target board installed 30 steps away, approximately 36 meters. The target board recovered by the craftsman had 6 holes neatly drilled in it. The craftsman turned the target board back. On the back of the red cloth where the crown was sewn, iron bullets were meticulously sewn. King Sejong and his ministers carefully checked the target board. Jo Mao-sing, who was checking the target board, shared his impressions with King Sejong. "I think the Jurchen tribes and Japanese pirates who come within at least 30 paces will see hell." "Do you think so?" "Yes." At Jo Mao-sing's assertion, King Sejong looked at Choi Hae-san and Ikkian. Their faces were full of confidence despite their military background. Sejong looked at their faces and nodded. Looking at the expressions on the officers' faces, "I understand." Then, about the armor. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I still have a firearm left to introduce you to." "Still?" Sejong looked slightly bored. The efforts put in by the Crown Prince and those under him were visible to the presidents I just saw. If gunpowder and the commanders could be properly supplied, securing the safety of Joseon was as easy as flipping the palm of your hand. No. If you put in a little more effort, you can restore the true nature of the old Samhan, his brother Yangnyeong said. As I was trying to calm down my burgeoning greed, Choi Hae-san was igniting the flame again. Sejong, who was about to leave, sat down again after hearing Choi Hae-san's words. "General, proceed. I am devastated. The weapon to be introduced this time is a firebomb. We will have to move the location. Please guide me." "Yes, Your Majesty." Sejong walked while being guided by Choi Hae-san. "It's quite a distance, isn't it?" Sejong, who was slightly out of breath, spoke and Hyang explained the reason. "Because the place is the place. Did you want to ride a horse?" "Abama. It has been said that a man's 2 legs are like the pillars of a house. Only when the pillars are strong does the house become strong." When Hyang was about to make a long speech about health, King Sejong hurriedly interrupted him. Walk, walk. You have to have strong legs to prevent blowing. He can walk? Wow, he talks a lot. He gets angry every time I do something. How can I give birth to a child like this? Sejong continued to grumble with his mouth, but took more force and took long strides. The place where Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon guided King Sejong was a larger place than the previous demonstration hall. Not only was it large, but it also had taller and thicker earthen walls. In front of the podium where King Sejong and his ministers were seated, the wall made of sacks of soil was taller and thicker than before. On the opposite side was the beginning of the foothills of Mt Mokmiok, and there was bare land at least 50 square meters wide. Did they cut down the trees? Yes, because it could cause a fire. That's right. When King Sejong and the ministers took their places on the podium, the craftsmen and soldiers who were waiting brought a large table and immediately brought various items and placed them on the table. Hae-san Choi, who was sitting next to the table, began introducing the new weapon. The fire bombs I'm going to show you from now on are fire bombs that are fired with a toy. Choi Hae-san used his baton to point to a round fire bomb made of cast iron. We named this fire bomb Bijeok Jinshinro, Feijichun Tamlei. It's a big hit. Is it a type of Jinshinro? What is Jin Tian Lai? I've only seen it in records, but it is said to be similar to Jiliapota. Records say it was used by Song and Jiam. Is it because they use toys that they are disparaged? In response to Choi Hae-san's explanation, the ministers traced their memories and shared opinions. Kang smiled bitterly as he observed the reactions of the ministers. If you talk about King Munjong, you may like Sinjijin and Wacha, but you can't miss cliches. A cliché among clichés. A turtle ship on the sea. A Bijeok Jinshinro on the land. After gaining some understanding of personal weapons, the first thing that began work was the support firearms section. With a blank piece of paper in front of her, Kiang crossed her arms and muttered, "Considering the level of craftsman, I might be greedy, but since other things don't follow suit, this definitely gives me something to try." Kiang opened the book he had left next to him and looked through the list. Shinjijin and Wacha. These also need development, but we need something that can more clearly instill fear in the enemy. Kiang was lost in thought as he tapped his fingers on the Sinjijin and Wacha items. Speaking of King Munjong, the most famous things were Sinjijin and Wacha. In addition, the combat record of Sinjijin and Wacha was not something to be ignored. However, I felt that the scent was lacking. We have to show tangible results before the end of the year. Ministers won't sit still for budget reasons, right? After pondering what would be best as a support firearm, Kang finally came to a conclusion. As expected, there is only one answer. Bijeok Jinshinro. Turtle ship in the sea, Bijeok Jinshinro on land. It's a cliché, but King straightened his back. It's the best for impact. After deciding on Bijeok Jinshinro, Kang fell into another worry. If it is actually made, will it be MK.1 or MK.2? Or will it be MK.2-1? The scents labeled MK.1, MK.2, and MK.2-1 were arbitrarily classified according to what shape does the Bijeok Jinshinro explode in? MK.1, MK.2, and MK.2-1 made people worry about scent for a while, even in the 21st century. The MK.1 is a scene we usually see in dramas, where the gunpowder inside explodes and the caltrop and cast iron shells it contains break apart, causing fragments to spread out in all directions and kill the enemy. When the MK.2 is ignited from the inside, flame and iron are sprayed through the hole where the gunpowder was inserted. Due to the position of the rescuer, Jinshinro rotates and sprays flames and iron in all directions, inflicting casualties on the enemy. The reason why the MK.2 was introduced was because the black powder used by Joseon had a slow combustion speed. It was difficult to burn instantaneously at a high speed, and the explosion pressure, which quickly exceeded the critical value, shattered the charcoal body and scattered fragments, iron, and flames in all directions. Instead, gunpowder was injected. A hole blocked by a piece of wood was opened, and flame and iron were sprayed through the hole. When I heard this claim, Kang shook his head. Why? There are two holes in the Bijeok Jinshinro, right? The hole where the time fuse is inserted, and the hole where gunpowder and glue are inserted. But why is it only in one place? Unable to find a clear solution to the question, Kang simply remembered that it was interesting and forgot the facts. After that, as time passed, the actual Bijeok Jinshinro was discovered, and news came that an exhibition would be held. Kang, who had just beaten up a civil servant and was preparing for a blacksmith shop, remembered a memory from the past and immediately went to the exhibition hall. Kang, who visited the exhibition, walked around the glass wall that protected the excavated Bijeok Jinshinro and looked closely at it. Kiang, who had been looking at Bijeok Jinshinli for a while, stepped back. You solved one problem, but another problem arises? The problem that Hyang solved was the opening door problem. According to the records, it was said that Mokgok, a time-limited shrine, was installed and then covered with a lid. I can't see any special locks, so how did they secure it? The question of scent was solved by seeing the actual thing. The lid of the actual Bijeok Jinshinro was hollowed out in a square shape, and there was a round hole in the center for inserting a wooden piece. And there was an answer in that square-shaped area. The hollow part looked square but was rectangular, and there was a long, thick groove carved into the wall. So, if you put the lid on and turn it 90 degrees, the lid will fit into the groove and become fixed. One problem was solved, but another problem arose. The hole through which gunpowder and iron were inserted was smaller than expected. The triangular-shaped ridges shown in various reconstructions were of considerable size. In the CG that was played at the exhibition, the problem was solved by inserting the iron before driving the wood and only injecting gunpowder through the hole on the side. If that were to happen, wouldn't the debris be spread evenly? That's right. To answer such questions, King searched the internet diligently. And a video I saw on the internet added to my doubts. This was the appearance of the MK.2-1. The video was aired by a broadcasting station in the early 2000s. A professor from a naval research institute came forward, and there, he put triangular iron and gunpowder into the wood grain and put wood grain in it, and then covered it with iron. After covering the gachel, a lead plate was inserted into the gap between the body of the Bijeok Jinshinro and the gachel and driven in firmly with a hammer to secure the lid. In the subsequent firepower test, the Bijeok Jinshinro was empty, with debris pouring out of the opening. There was almost nothing wrong with the empty body of Bijeok Jinshinre. In the end, Kiang, who still couldn't solve the question, decided to solve it himself, and the result was the first fight behind the blacksmith shop that made his cousin grab him by the collar. Kiang, recalling the turbulent memories of the 21st century and wondering whether it was MK.1, MK.2, or MK.2-1, shook his head vigorously and grabbed his gold pencil. Why should I worry about that? I decided to make it anyway. Let's go with the MK.21, a 21st century version. The choice of scent was to maximize productivity and killing power. Choi Hasen opened his mouth as he watched the ministers discussing the etymology. This Bijeok Jinshinro was planned and designed by His Majesty the Crown Prince himself. As Choi Hasen explained, King Sejong and the minister's attention focused on Hyang. As attention was focused on her, Hyang spoke confidently. Abama will never disappoint. Sejong received Hyang's words with a proud expression. You've never let me down before, General. Go ahead. Yes, Your Majesty. First of all, if you look at the structure of Bijeok Jinshinro, the inside of the bomb is filled with gunpowder. When the wick is ignited, it explodes. It looks very simple on the outside, but there is a very mysterious trick hidden there. Mysterious number? You can control the explosion time. Choi Hasen explained how to use Bijeok Jinshinro. Wrap the wick around the Mokgok, put it in the barrel, plant it in the Bijeok Jinshinro, and close the lid. Then, fill it with gunpowder through the hole in the side, and close the hole. Afterwards, put it in a toy filled with gunpowder, and then release it. Then, 300 it flies 500 paces, approximately 600 m, from 360 meters, and explodes. Sejong opened his mouth at Choi Hasen's explanation. Is it possible to control time by winding a wick around that neck? That's right. What is the power? I will show you now. Implement it. At Choi Hasen's order, soldiers came into the demonstration hall with large toy guns and Bijeok Jinshinro. The soldiers who stopped in front of King Sejong put down everything they had brought and performed a military ceremony. Insect. The soldiers who paid military honors moved the Dwangu and the Bijeok Jinshinro to the center of the demonstration site. The place where Dwangu's port was headed was an open space on Mt Mokmyok, about 100 jang, about 330 m, away. In the vacant lot, red and blue target boards and scarecrows wearing chain armor, and leather armor were erected densely. The soldiers who installed the anti-tank guns prepared for the Bijeok Jinshinro. Mogok put the paper bucket in, put a lid on it, and turned it around with a special tool to close it tightly. Similarly, after filling the hole in the side with gunpowder, the lid was screwed back in with the same tool. After completing the preparation of the Bijeok Jinshinro, the soldiers picked it up and placed it in the large toy. Afterwards, the soldiers pulled the rail attached to the back of the large toy, put the Donghua cap on it, then pulled the rope attached to the rail and hid behind the protective wall built at the back. Your Highness, please cover yourself for a moment as well. This is to prevent any possible danger. I understand. At Choi Hasten's words, King Sejong and the ministers hid behind the protective wall installed in front of the podium. As King Sejong safely covered himself, the military officer standing next to Choi Hasan waved a red flag. Bampo, Bampa, Bampa, Pop, Whoa, Boom. When the soldiers hiding behind the protective wall pulled the string, the Daewongu fired a lightning bolt. The Bijeok Jinchanro flew across the sky, making a flying sound like a whistle, and fell into the open space, soon exploding with a loud noise. Laugh. Sejong let out a small groan at the shock wave that came with the heavy drinking. Your Highness, what's going on? Hearing Sejong's moans, Huang He, who was right next to him, urgently asked. In response to Huang He's question, King Sejong waved his hand. It's nothing. I was just surprised for a moment. Your Highness, you may wake up. Kurant. Hyang muttered to himself as he stood up with strength in his thighs. I really need to lose more weight. Should I eat less? He muttered in a low voice, and Sejong must have heard it and shouted at Hyang. You bastard! Are you planning to starve your baby? Oh no. Let's take a look at the target. Seeing Hyang quickly change the subject, Sejong turned his head, muttering a complaint under his breath. King Sejong and the ministers who turned their heads to look at the target could not close their mouths. Even from a distance, the targets and scarecrows erected around the vacant lot were in disarray. Would you like to come closer and take a look? That's right. Sejong, who was curious, was the first to step forward and walked forward. This is it. This is the power of a single bullet. The ministers who arrived at the place where the scarecrows were could not hide their surprise. There was not a single scarecrow standing properly. The pillars that were holding the parietal plate were flying all over the place along with the parietal plate, and scarecrows wearing armor were also scattered everywhere. King Sejong and the ministers picked up the fallen target boards and scarecrows and inspected their condition. If they were real people, I don't even want to think about it. If they were real people, it would have been hell. The ministers who saw the parietal plates and armor full of holes shook their heads. As they said, if it had actually been used on people wearing armor, it was certain that it would have been a scary situation, even in a dream. If there are survivors in this situation, it might be more merciful to kill them, right? Sejong looked at the parietal plate in his hand and muttered softly. The parietal plate in Sejong's hand had a hole large enough for his fist to enter. Not all ministers reacted negatively. Zhou Maoseng, who was in charge of military affairs, completely lost his senses. Your Majesty, is it possible to mass-produce this What-An right away? No, please answer that it is possible. Well, if you just put in a little effort. In response to Hyang's answer, Zhou Maoseng immediately fought in front of King Sejong. Your Majesty, we need to mass-produce these fire bombs right now. Zhang Chongtong and Masang Chongtong are miraculous weapons, but compared to these fire bullets, they are nothing more than a bloodshed. If we can mass-produce these bombs, the problem of aftershocks can be solved right away. It's not just aftershocks. Even that abominable Tsushima Island can be completely subjugated. No, not only Tsushima Island, but we can subdue the Japanese pirates' base as well? Your Majesty, we must mass-produce it. The remonstrances that Zhou Maoseng shouted at the top of his lungs made even King Sejong look shocked. However, King Sejong decided to take a break. Now that we have confirmed its power, let's look into it in more detail and make a decision. It may be a burden on Joseon's capabilities. Your Majesty, if your capabilities are limited, you can increase your capabilities. If you are short of saltpeter, we will search through kitchens and back rooms throughout Joseon. And if you are short of sulfur, we will even resort to smuggling to get it. If you are short of charcoal, we will even cut down all the trees in Joseon. We must mass-produce it. Zhou Maoseng looked as if he was going to hang on to Sejong's pants. Huang He intervened. Captain, didn't you hear His Majesty's voice? You said we would listen to a further explanation and then discuss it. Why is this in such a hurry? Get up quickly. What a disgrace. Okay. At Huang He's point, Zhou Maoseng straightened up and looked at King Sejong. King, who saw Zhou Maoseng's earnest expression looking at the three servants, muttered to himself, why does it remind me of the cat from that movie? Explain why Bijeok Jinchanroy exerts such power. Yes, Your Highness. In response to King Sejong's order, Choi Hasten began to explain. The shell of the fire charcoal was made as thin as possible. It was designed to be strong and thick enough to withstand the impact of launch and impact, but not an internal explosion. Small beads made of cast iron were applied to the inside of the fire charcoal shell. These beads increased the number of fragments, increasing killing power, increased the power of gunpowder. Although it did not use Hokyu or Diagap-style gunpowder, it maintained its power by omitting the process of mixing soil with Yule-style gunpowder. Really, the hard work is visible. Choi Hae-san bowed his head and responded to Sejong's evaluation. The part that took effort was adjusting the thickness of the shell. The rest was just following what His Majesty the Crown Prince had already decided. In Choi Hae-san's answer, Sejong's gaze as he looked at the incense contained many things. Sejong, who was looking at the incense like that, asked Hae-san Choi a question. Just now, the military commander requested mass production of the Bijeok Jinshinro. Is that possible? I think that is possible if there is a sufficient supply of gunpowder. Huang He intervened in Choi Hae-san's answer. General, is it really possible? Earlier, His Majesty the Crown Prince said that the reason why mass production of Diagap-style gunpowder is impossible is because there is a shortage of craftsmen. Based on what I know, it would take a lot of excellent craftsmen to mass produce such amazing gunpowder. If that's the case, wouldn't the same problem arise? Choi Hae-san nodded at Huang He's point. The captain's point is correct. However, when His Majesty the Crown Prince made this watan, he also thought about that part. Creating a lightning bolt using the original method is too inefficient. The original Bijeok Jinshinro used a sphere made of whole cast iron. By 21st century standards, this was a problematic method. Of course, making a hollow circular sphere was technically excellent, but in terms of production efficiency, it was not a method I would recommend. Looking at the performance, it is obvious that shut up and mass produce would be better, so we have to do something. The first move Hyang took was to split the Bijeok Jinshinro sphere in two. The design of the incense was changed and a female screw was installed on one side of the hemisphere divided into two, and a male screw was installed on the other side. By aligning and turning the screws engraved on the two hemispheres were completed into one sphere. Screws were also applied to the part where the time fuse enters and the hole where gunpowder is injected. The time-limiting fuse was installed, a lid covering it and gunpowder were added, and a screw was carved into the cover that closed the hole to make it more secure. Kang began a firepower test using the prototypes created in this way. First, let's try removing the firing process from the toy. Yes, sir. As a result of the test, the improved Bijeok Jinshinro exploded as expected. This is amazing. How about sending it to the north right away? Ikian and Choi Hae-san couldn't stop being amazed when they saw the test site turned into a mess. However, Kang smiled and shook her head. There's still a lot to test. Let's start with the launch test. Fire. I see. I forgot the firing da. In the subsequent launch test, the Bijeok Jinshinro was launched safely. After checking the results, Hyang moved on to the next task. Now, let's report to His Majesty and make arrangements. Okay, then, shall we reduce the thickness of the shell? First, let's reduce it by 1.5 millimeters. Following the instructions of the village, craftsmen created prototypes that reduced the thickness of the shell in increments of 5 ri, starting from 40 ri, 40% of 1 chi, approximately 1.2 centimeters. It was literally a process of embedding it into the body through trial and error. As you said, when fired from a toy filled with twice as much gunpowder, the thinnest toy that survived from launch to landing was one with 30%, approximately 9 millimeters, shaped off. Then this time, shall we try marinating gunpowder and experimenting? Yes, sir. In the subsequent test, the Bijeok Jinshinro, which shaved 30% off, withstood the impact of launch and landing and exploded properly. After seeing the results, Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon became greedy again. The results are good, so let's report. The explosion radius is too wide. There is a risk of damage to our allies. Let's research ways to increase lethality while reducing the explosion radius. Your command is correct. I will think about it. Choi Hae-san, Ikian, military officers, and craftsmen, who heard Hyang's order, began to search for various numbers to find the optimal number. However, it was difficult to find a plan that simultaneously satisfied the contradictory conditions of strengthening lethality and reducing the danger radius. In the end, the scent had to come out again. Please bring clay, paper, and an 8-sized pill. The pill should be made of cast iron. Yes, sir. When the craftsman brought the materials, the mayor gave orders to the craftsman. Apply a half-thick layer of clay to the inside of the Bijeok Jinshinro shell, and then insert the Zoran wand into it. Then, When the clay dries, apply paper and secure it tightly so that it does not fall off. The military officers and craftsmen who heard Hyang's orders immediately let out exclamations. Ah, such a number. In subsequent tests, the improved Bigeok Jinshinro had a smaller dangerous radius than the first one, but its killing power was further strengthened. Hyang, who was examining the results, looked back at Choi Hae-san and Ikkian. Let's improve it a little more. Just a little more, yes, sir. In the second improvement that followed, the craftsmen of the county department engraved gold like a checkerboard on the inside of the shell of the Bigeok Jinshinro. And then I laid down one more layer of Joran. After completing the second improvement, and seeing the results from the subsequent test, Hyang gave orders to Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon. I think this is enough. If we go any further, future generations will think of us as bloodthirsty and ruthless people. That's right. Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon nodded vigorously at Hyang's words. The scenery created by the newly improved Bigeok Jinshinro was nothing short of a murderous scenery. Then now let's report. Now let's improve the artillery that will fire these bullets. Yes? Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon were in tears at Hyang's words. The Hyang observed the great Wango, Da-wan, that would fire the Bigeok Jinshinro. The amount of gunpowder that goes into the chamber is 35 taels, about 1.3 kilograms. The problem is that it is not in an efficient form. What Hyang pointed out was the overall design of the toy. Let's change the structure. Hyang designed the artillery that would fire the Bigeok Jinshinro in a traditional straight shape. There, a carriage similar in shape to the carriage on which Western-style cannons were mounted in the 18th and 19th centuries was made. Is it too Western? I don't think it is. Hyang tilted his head when he saw what he had drawn. To be precise, the design created by Mayan Hyang was close to the heavy infantry artillery made by Joseon during the Daewongun era. Hyang hung up a map depicting the canvas and gun he thought of and exchanged opinions with Choi Hae-san, Ikkian, and craftsmen. Put it on a cart with big wheels. Maneuverability will improve. Wouldn't it be much easier to deal with the Jurchen tribe in the north if the artillery's mobility improves? Choi Hae-san and Lee Cheon nodded at Hyang's words. Because they had sufficient practical experience in the south and the north, the two men were able to immediately understand the benefits mentioned by Hyang. Lee Cheon, who was watching the pleasure, came to a conclusion. We make carts loaded with artillery and carts filled with firebombs and gunpowder. If Bigeok Jinshin Lee can accompany even 2 guns, the Jurchen people won't even dare to do anything reckless. When Choi Hae-san and Ikkian, who can be said to be the best experts in the Joseon military regarding artillery, agreed, the development of artillery proceeded quickly. What makes the newly developed artillery different from existing artillery is that not only the exterior of the artillery, but also the back of the inner chamber is round. General Choi, do you remember when we first tested Pakun a long time ago? Yes. At that time, if you look at the soot created on the copper plate, it's spread out radially. I think this means that when gunpowder explodes, the energy spreads out like that. Choi Hae-san, who was thinking deeply about Hyang's words, nodded. I think so. Wouldn't the gun be stronger if the back of the chamber were rounded like this? It would be the same thickness no matter the angle. Choi Hae-san, who was examining the drawing closely, nodded. It seems worth a try. After the first canvas was made, Hyang and Choi Hae-san immediately began testing. 2 times the amount of gunpowder was put into the chamber of the existing large gun and the new gun, tightly blocked with a block of wood, and then a heavy single stone was inserted. After firing about 4 times in succession, the new artillery did not cause any problems, but the anti-tank gun cracked at the lower edge of the chamber. After checking the results, Hae-san Choi opened the tablet and wrote. As a result of the test, it was confirmed that making the rear of the gun and chamber into a curved surface strengthens durability. It seems right to improve other guns, or design a new gun with a similar shape. So, everything about this Bigeok Jinshinro, not only the bombs but also the design of the artillery, was made by the Crown Prince. Hearing Choi Hae-san's explanation, King Sejong and the ministers looked at the fragrance once again. A guy like you. It's already making me tired to even say that I'm surprised. The ministers all nodded at Sejong's words. The ministers were exhausted as they watched the amazing displays continue to unfold. No, the heavens were turning blue as the government officials and Hoja Pansio calculated the budget needed to mass produce it in advance. I want to see that newly made canvas. I follow your orders. After a while, 2 carriages entered the demonstration hall. Each carriage was pulled by 2 horses. The first cart pulls a carriage with artillery, and the second cart carries Bigeok Jinshinro and gunpowder to be used for artillery. While listening to Choi Hae-san's explanation, King Sejong looked at the carts. The cart connected to the carriage was loaded with 2 wooden boxes. Those boxes contain ammunition and explosives that will be used as soon as the artillery is discharged. The soldiers opened the lids of the boxes on the cart. As Sejong was examining the boxes, small pouches caught his eye. What are these pockets? In response to Sejong's question, Choi Hae-sun opened his pocket and took out the contents inside. Here are the fireworks to set the time until the explosion, the wood to win the fireworks, 1 niang of Gapsid gunpowder to ignite the fire-style gunpowder, and a paper container to hold it all and plant it in the Bijeok Jinchanro. Sejong nodded at Choi Hae-sun's explanation. That's right. Since the Japanese-style gunpowder doesn't catch fire with a wick, you start the fire with the Japanese-style gunpowder. But what's the problem? At first we used bamboo, but there were problems with uniformity, so we made the barrels out of paper. I see. That's a good idea. It was the Crown Prince's opinion. When Choi Hae-sun gave credit to Hyang, King Sejong looked back at Hyang. Your hard work is visible. This is a tribute to General Choi, General Lee, other military officers, and craftsmen. It was a scent that honored soldiers and craftsmen. Sejong's eyes, as he was looking at the artillery, stopped at the back of the artillery. The part that caught King Sejong's attention was the part connected to the pedestal of the canvas. There was a pillar with screws engraved on it, and there was a handle similar to a wheel next to the gear wheels connected here and there. And next to it, there was a semicircular disc with the Chinese characters 1, Wei, Gun, Jin, Chojian, Chaojin, written on it. Crown. What is this for? Yes, it involves controlling the firing range by adjusting the angle of the gun. Adjust the range? Yes. This is how we do it. When the handle, similar to a whirlpool, was turned, the muzzle moved up and down. Sejong, who was looking at that scene, turned his head. You control the distance by adjusting the angle of the muzzle like this? Choi Hae-sun, who was next to King Sejong's question, immediately answered. Yes, Your Majesty. How? It's the same principle as shooting a bow. When you hit a distant target with a bow, don't you raise the bow upward and shoot in a curved line? Aha. Sejong nodded and expressed exclamation at Choi Hae-sun's explanation. Choi Hae-sun explained, pointing to a semicircular rangefinder. If you adjust the angle of the muzzle according to this scale, you can adjust the distance from 300 to 500 steps. Sejong, who had been closely examining the scale at Choi Hae-sun's explanation, looked back at Choi Hae-sun and Ikkian. It must have taken a lot of effort to figure out this scale. That's right. Choi Hae-sun and Lee Cheon nodded at Sejong's words. In order to accurately measure the fact that it was discovered accidentally, it was a coincidence mixed with the intention of Hyang, Choi Hae-sun, Ikkian, and the craftsmen fired hundreds of Bijeok Jinchanro. In order to reduce unnecessary consumption of gunpowder, Bijeok Jinchanros filled with dirt and gravel flew through the air without stopping, and in the end, they had to make nearly 100 new ones that were broken due to metal fatigue. That wasn't all. Many of the cows raised on farms near Area 51 died because they could not overcome the stress caused by heavy drinking, and a considerable amount of wealth was lost as a result of this surge. And the meat from the dead cow was put on the table of artisans and soldiers. If the distance can be adjusted like this, it will have a better effect in battle. Can this be applied to other artillery pieces as well? Hyang answered King Sejong's question. The Institute's officials are currently conducting research. However, after hearing the answer, King Sejong looked for Jancho among his subjects. Deputy Director Jong, I believe in the Lord. Jancho bowed his head and responded to Sejong's words. I honor your command. Jianko's voice as he answered was full of moisture. I still can't go home. Because the same order had already been issued, the Institute's officials were waging a war with numbers, clutching books recording the results of the bombardment. The direction was to investigate the changing distances in various and unusual situations, create a table, formalize this, and create a distance control system for each gun. As a result, the Institute's officials could only go home on designated holidays, 9 days on duty, and 1 day off. Fortunately, Kang followed this rule like a sword. However, there were periods when officials voluntarily worked overtime. That period was the period of floating meju. Joseon consumed so much soybean paste and soy sauce that it was called the land of soybean paste. As consumption was high, every house was filled with jars of soybean paste, and even the residential areas of Hanseong were filled with the smell of soybean paste. As such, the smell of soy sauce was familiar to Joseon people. However, even for those Joseon people, the smell coming from floating meju was a hardship. In particular, the larger the family, the more likely it was to have a large amount of meju. So the smell of meju was more severe in the homes of high-ranking officials with many slaves and guests. The palace also floated a large amount of meju, But because the palace was extremely spacious, the smell of Meju was not that strong. For that reason, the officials postponed the retreat as long as possible when it was time to float Meju. Anyway, thanks to the orders of King Sejong and Hyang, Joseon became the first country in the world to create and apply sapio, serbao, for use in artillery. King Sejong set up a silver waist that inspected all the artillery and auxiliary equipment that fired Bijiok Jinchenro. I think I've seen everything there is to see, but there's one last thing to check before checking the ledger. The armor worn by the military officers and soldiers here is different from what I'm used to seeing, so please explain it. I've prepared it for you. I'll show you around. Following King Sejong's order, Yang and Choi hastened guided King Sejong and the ministers to a building on one side. Chairs were prepared in the largest room in the building, and King Sejong and his ministers could sit comfortably. When all preparations were completed, a scent appeared and the new armor was explained in earnest. If you look at the armor used by our Joseon military, they generally wear chain armor or padded armor. However, this armor takes a lot of work to make and maintain. Not only the Gapsa who are on duty in order to stand, but also the soldiers who perform military service, all have to prepare their own armor, so the quality is also world-class. King Sejong and the ministers all nodded at Hyang's explanation. This was because appeals were frequently posted, reporting the suffering of the people related to this and requesting a solution. Some soldiers wear purses and cotton armor due to financial issues, but it is also true that their defensive power is lower than that of iron armor. That's right. Sejong nodded at the explanation of the fragrance. Yang pointed to his scalp with his baton and continued his speech. This is a double armor that was newly started to be used at the end of the Joseon dynasty. It is made of cotton cloth and pine and has an iron plate sewn into the back to strengthen its defense power. In terms of defense power alone, it is enough to block an arrow fired at a distance of 50 paces. It is the strongest armor in terms of defense power. King Sejong and the ministers nodded at Hyang's words. In the last conquest of Tsushima Island, Dujang Gap boasted its strongest defense. Hyang continued talking. However, this two-headed pack has several problems. Hyang pointed out the problem with Dujang Gap. First of all, production requires a lot of time and labor. For steel plates that are fixed with two pieces, each piece must be forged, and then individually hammered with two pieces. Cost is also an issue. Even though iron and cotton cloth are the same, the price of the silk used as the lining and the fur that covers the lining, cuffs, sides, collar, and front collar is quite expensive. Of course, it is often wrapped with cotton cloth or silk, but to make it properly, you need to use rabbit fur, roe deer fur, or fox fur. Although it has the strongest defense, it also has many weaknesses. First of all, not only the back but also the front and sides are open. If you are attacked by an arrow from a distance, the probability is not a problem unless you are extremely unlucky, but in close combat, this becomes a problem. To prevent this, you must additionally wear a hoik, armpit cover, or an umsim, groin cover. However, even in this case, the problem still remains. Difficult to wear for a long time. This is because the shape of the armor takes the form of a robe, darumaji. Because the entire weight of the armor is supported by the shoulders, it becomes easily fatigued. To address the above issues, the new armor has changed its type as follows. The steel plate inside the face armor was replaced with a single steel plate. The protection of the upper body is secured with two steel plates, front and back. Resolve the front and side defense issues. Since it is a single sheet of steel, the front problem was solved, and the side problem was solved by overlapping the front and back plates by about half an inch. The armpit problem was solved by attaching circular iron pieces to the protective part that covers the shoulders and arms. The armor was divided into two parts named upper armor and upper armor. By doing this, all of the weight of the armor was distributed throughout the body rather than being held by the shoulders, making it less tiring even when worn for a long time. Newly shaped armor was added to the shins, elbows, and soft areas to enhance protection. The armor made that way is this armor. Kang finished speaking by pointing to the armor worn in the last pleasure. Buddha. After Hyang's explanation, King Sejong and the ministers carefully examined the armor in question. Sejong, who was examining the armor, asked Hyang a question. How much has the weight increased compared to the existing Dujang Gap? I gained 8 pounds, approximately 4.8 kilograms. The weight increased due to the addition of the elbow area, softness, and shin pads. That's the only thing that has increased? When Sejong looked suspicious, King immediately explained. First of all, the number of crowns was significantly reduced, and instead of a cotton armor covering the iron plate, it was replaced with a cotton cloth. Sejong stroked his beard and did the calculation after hearing Hyang's report. The total weight gained by adding and subtracting like that is 10 pounds. Who wears these armors? Those who wear full armor will be cavalrymen and swordsmen, and the modified upper armor will be used by Führers and artillerymen. The helmet will be commonly used by all classes. What do people who have tried this say? The weight has increased a bit, but they say it is surprisingly bearable as the weight is distributed throughout the entire body. Additionally, as more parts are covered by the iron armor, they say their mind becomes more stable and a lot of their fear disappears. In response to Hyang, Sejong stroked his beard. I guess that's something you need to experience in combat to understand. I'd like to see the structure of this armor in more detail. I've already prepared it. At the hand signal of incense, soldiers came in carrying a large prize. On the table were laid out pieces of iron armor with the cloths covering them removed. The shape of the iron armor is truly unique. Sejong's eyes sparkled when he saw the shapes of the chest armor, back armor, and other iron plates. Kang smiled internally at Sejong's reaction. I made it myself, but I was a bit surprised. When he first checked the prototype of the new armor, Kang slightly shook his head. What? What about this hideous hybrid? The armor designed by Hyang was a combination of Western full-plate mail and double armor. While researching the problem of armor, Kang was faced with a choice. This was because the full-plate mail was slightly superior in defense, and the two-plate mail was slightly superior in activity. What should I do with this? Should I just skip the armor part? However, the scent could not just pass over the armor part. This was because he had the problem of becoming a swordsman who had to handle close combat. This is so. Hyang, who was worried about armor, ultimately decided to improve the armor because of the maintenance problems of chain and plate armor and the production cost of double armor. The cost to properly make a Dujin gap was 16 stone and 10 head for the armor and 4 stone and 5 head for the helmet. Why is this so expensive? The price was higher than expected and I questioned why. After much digging, what I found out was that not only did the material cost a lot, but the labor cost was also significant. In the end, Kang came to a conclusion. Let's just change it. Let's reduce material costs wherever possible, and also reduce labor costs as much as possible. For that purpose, the scent borrows the design of the full-plate mail. While King Sejong was talking about his impressions of the new armor, Huang He, who was closely observing the armor, asked Hyang a question. Your Majesty the Crown Prince. Yes. From what I see now, it appears that everything from the helmet to the iron plates of the armor is made of a single iron plate. Is that correct? You're right. So, the craftsman hammered and processed those plates one by one. Isn't this too much work? Cost issues may arise. Kang nodded at Huang He's point. You're right. I had the same problem, so? After speaking for a moment, Kang looked at Huang He and continued speaking with a smile. I made it by taking a picture. The beginning of mass production is press. The scent was the reason why the design of full-plate mail had to be adopted. Sejong asked Hyang a question with a stern expression. It was said that the types of soldiers who wear newly made armor are cavalry and sword soldiers. But as far as I know, there is no such thing as sword soldiers. Is there a newly created class? That's right. We integrated the existing Pingbisu, Changsu, and Jangyeomsu. The reason is, looking at the performance of the newly created guns and artillery, our Joseon army will be operated with a focus on the guns, artillery, and cavalry in the future. In that case, training Pingbisu, spearmen, and long swordsmen in detail will place a burden on the budget. So, those classes were integrated into one. Is this it? That's right. In response to Hyang's response, Sejong immediately pointed out the problem. At first glance, what you say is correct. However, the situation on the battlefield changes in an instant, so it may be a difficult situation for swordsmen alone. If the firepower of the gun barrel and artillery is not enough to suppress the enemy will attack the swordsman's defense line. What will you do if you break through? Kang nodded at Sejong's point. Even Soja knows that part. That's why we prepared the technique for the Jangchangtong. The Jangchangtong can also be used as a single spear. In addition, we are teaching the Chungtong soldiers a spear technique using the Jangchangtong. With a single spear at President Chang? After hearing Hyang's explanation, Sejong traced his memories and assessed the possibilities. The length of the gap Sikjang Chongtong seen at the demonstration site was considerable. Put a spear blade in there? Perhaps. Sejong, who was weighing various possibilities, nodded. It seems possible. However, I will postpone adjusting the organization of all Joseon forces according to your opinion. I think it is not too late to check the results of the actual battle and make a decision. Kiang bowed her head and accepted Sejong's decision. I follow Abima's decision. After the demonstration of the new weapons made by officials and craftsmen from Hyang, Choi Hasen, Ikkian, and the Research Institute together, King Sejong and the ministers prepared for a full-scale ledger audit. But it's a bit marketable. King Sejong, exhausted from watching the demonstration that started early in the morning, felt hungry and looked at the ministers. Why don't we go back to the palace for a while and do some daytime work? Kiang intervened in Sejong's words. Abima, would you like to try some dry food for the soldiers? Dry? Is it delicious? King Sejong the Great showed curiosity at Hyang's suggestion. However, when Sejong asked about the taste, Kiang slightly shook his head. On the battlefield, when soldiers can't cook, the food they eat is dry. They can't boast about the taste. It's not the famous French military combat rations. What should I do? Sejong stroked his beard and pondered for a moment before making a decision. Okay, let's try it. Don't you have to eat dry food to understand the hardships of the soldiers? Let's eat it together, too. I honor your command. The ministers answered in shaky voices. This was because he had to eat food that the crown prince had openly said he was not sure about the taste of. After a while, soldiers came in with a steaming pot. Following them, other soldiers came in with bowls of white kimchi and empty bowls. The soldiers placed pots and kimchi on the empty table where the armor parts had been removed and took their seats behind it. Abima, please try it. Huh? I guess so. When King Sejong stood in front of the table, the soldier who bowed politely scooped up thick porridge from the pot with a ladle and put it in a bowl, then held out the bowl with both hands. King Sejong emptied the bowl of porridge cleanly, as if it satisfied his taste. Sejong, who handed the bowl to the merchant, continued to ask Kiang questions. Do soldiers even eat that much for one meal? That's right. It's not food, it's death. How long can you last? At least it's enough to last me until my next meal, because it contains not only barley and rice, but also a lot of meat. While nodding his head at Hyang's words, Sejong continued to ask questions to confirm the problem. A lot of water is used to make porridge. However, when fighting a war, the biggest problem is obtaining drinking water. What is the solution to this? We have created a framework to be used in cases where clean drinking water is difficult to obtain. I made a frame to purify water. Let's see. I will guide you. Kiang led King Sejong to a place outside the building. There, a wooden frame that appeared to be about 1 stone tall, approximately 90 centimeters, was placed on top of a wooden stand that was about the length of an adult man's calf. This is the water purification frame. By what principle is it done? Pile charcoal, wood ash, and sand 3 inches, approximately 10 centimeters, thick from the bottom to the top, and spread pebbles 2 inches, approximately 7 centimeters, thick on top. After explaining, Kiang gestured to the soldiers next to him. After seeing the hand signal of incense, the soldiers filled a large bucket with water and soil, made muddy water, and poured it on a gravelly area. After a while, clear water trickled out through the iron pipe and bedded in the bottom pipe. Kiang, who received water from a bowl, held out the bowl to King Sejong. It's clear water. The visible turbidity has been filtered out, but there may be turbidity that cannot be seen, so you can boil it once and then eat it. If we have this framework, it will be able to provide some countermeasures even if the enemy uses clear-of-the-field tactics. The most commonly encountered tactic when subjugating the Jurchen tribe across the border was the clear-field tactic. When the Jurchen people saw the Joseon army invading, it was common for them to destroy drinking water sources by throwing dead animals into wells or blocking them with stones. Because of this, it was not easy to subdue the Jurchen tribe over a long period of time. Among the military officers at the Joseon Army Chief of Staff or training centers who had experience fighting against the Jurchen tribe, most of them pointed out this problem, and as a solution, Kiang created a simple water purifier. Sejong, who had been examining the water purifier while listening to the explanation of the scent, turned his head and looked at the ministers. When there is a drought or a flood, the biggest problem people face is finding drinking water. Don't you think that problem will be solved if you use this? It's easy to make, doesn't require a lot of money, and has excellent performance. I mean, the ministers who thought about King Sejong's words for a moment lowered their heads in unison. What a wise decision. It is not uncommon to experience drinking water shortages due to droughts or floods, so this will be the best solution. There were no ministers who opposed it. When there was a drought, people dug wells to find drinking water. Even if water came up through the well dug, it was not possible to drink it right away, because the water that first came up was muddy water. The people had to endure their thirst until the mud in the wells subsided. It was the same even when there was a flood, because streams, rivers, and even wells were all turned into mud. The people had to suffer from thirst even when they were overflowing with water. It was common for people who could not overcome their thirst to drink such muddy water and immediately get sick, which became the root of the problem and led to epidemics. When even the ministers agreed, King Sejong gave an order to Hyang. Please prepare documents related to creating this framework and distribute them to all government offices across the country. I honor your command. And the dry quantity seems to be good as a relief food, so once it is confirmed that it can be preserved for a long time, find a way to produce it in large quantities. I follow your orders. That dry food tasted better than I expected. It would be good as a snack when you're hungry at the palace. Thank you. Do you think salty dry food is delicious? Abama, are you of military stature? King Sejong and his ministers, who filled their lunch with porridge made from dry ingredients, began to give thanks in earnest. The ministers, who had been carefully examining the ledgers they had recorded so far to see if there were any omissions or traces of irregularities, questioned General Choi Hae-san. We continued to purchase land, but why did this happen? Did we not properly calculate the required land from the beginning? The ministers were arguing with General Choi Hae-san, but in reality, they were criticizing Hyang. If they challenged the crown prince right away, King Sejong could get caught. So they attacked him in a detour through Choi Hae-san. Choi Hae-san calmly answered the ministers' questions. As you can see, the main things studied in Area 51 are weapons that use gunpowder. Gunpowder is something that creates a huge explosion. So many people could not stand it, so they bought their own land. In addition to purchasing land, it is the same reason to purchase cattle and livestock. There have been repeated instances of livestock dying due to shock from heavy drinking, and that is why we have purchased such dead livestock. The ministers continued to argue, but Choi Hae-san answered confidently without hesitation. This was because no wealth had escaped through the back hole since the creation of the Research Institute, especially Area 51. This was because the Hyang controlled all the budget received from the government, and the Hyang was the one who was more strict about budget execution than anyone else. The Thanksgiving ended only when the sun was almost setting. After completing the audit, the ministers reported the results to King Sejong. According to the accounts, there is nothing wrong. Is that so? Thank you for your hard work. After saying thank you to the ministers for their hard work, King Sejong looked back. The crown prince also worked hard, and General Choi and General Lee worked hard too. Looking at the weapons I saw today, I can see the hard work the crown prince and his ministers have put in. They really worked hard. Hyang, Choi Hae-san, and Lee Cheon bowed their heads in response to King Sejong's praise. I am devastated. Your efforts will make Joseon's national defense stronger, so I hope you will work harder. I will do my best. Then, today, King Sejong, who was just getting up from his seat and preparing to return, looked at the new armor of the soldiers standing guard and looked back at the ministers. Before returning to the palace, let's first get a sense of military discipline. Your Highness, it looks like there won't be enough time for you to feel the military spirit. Huang He stepped forward and announced that it was late, but Sejong shook his head. If you take time off again, you'll have a lot of government work to do. Let's take a look while we're out. I accept your command. Huang He immediately bowed her head at Sejong's decision. Sejong's tone now has become much softer than in the morning. If he persisted here, it was certain that Sejong would immediately change his tone, which was a sign that Sejong was angry. It is natural to avoid showers that can be avoided. With that, Sejong left Area 51 and headed to the military headquarters. As Area 51 was expanded and it was right next to the military police, King Sejong was able to arrive at the military police right away. At the urgent news that the king has come to the military flag meeting, not only the officials who managed the military guard, but even the craftsmen came out to pay respects. I come to see His Majesty the Lord. King Sejong lightly raised his hand as he saw the officials and craftsmen bowing deeply to the floor. Stand up. At King Sejong's command, the officials and craftsmen stood up in a hurry. King Sejong, who was looking at the officials and craftsmen who had prepared themselves, immediately looked back at Judge Lee Jo, who was in charge of management. Does it seem like the number of officials in charge of military discipline is a little smaller than you realize? That's because there are many people who hold concurrent positions. There is a lot of work that artisans do, but if there are not enough officials to manage and supervise it, it becomes a problem. Prohibit officials who manage and supervise military discipline from holding concurrent positions. I accept your command. After answering King Sejong's command, Judge Lee Jo sighed softly. Whoa, it's full. But there aren't enough people. I am well aware of the lack of people in the government. The problem of Inji-Yong-1 will be resolved as quickly as possible as the management progresses, so please endure for the time being. No, it's hard work. You don't deserve it. Judge Lee Jo, who discovered his true feelings, became reflective and denied it. As he entered the military headquarters, Sejong spoke to Hyang. It is clear that all of the weapons you have made are incredibly powerful. However, it is also clear that they require a lot of work. Am I wrong? No. Therefore, I will look into the production process of those weapons. As you said, the number of craftsmen in Joseon is small, and there is a need for the people, so it is problematic to mobilize them carelessly. Therefore, I will look at the production process and see the power I learned from the demonstration during the day. I will consider it and decide on priorities. Is there a problem? No. It's a natural decision. King obediently acknowledged Sejong's words. The current situation in Joseon requires selection and concentration. It's a pity, though. Then, let's first look at making the barrel. Yes, Your Majesty. Under the guidance of officials, King Sejong observed the process of creating the president. Sejong looked back after seeing the process, starting from rolling the barrel and completing it by attaching various accessories. It's a lot of work. Yes. So we tried a lot to divide labor. Division of labor? In response to Hyang's response, Sejong calmly observed the creation process once again. Craftsmen who looked young at first glance were pounding iron plates on an anvil, making shapes and joining them together. And an elderly craftsman was meticulously checking the barrels that had been made. And the process of refinishing the barrels and selling the steel wires that were made in this way was almost entirely carried out by young craftsmen. The part that experienced craftsmen were responsible for was inspecting the quality of the parts, and finally the final assembly. I see. King Sejong, who saw the process of making Jang Chungtong, nodded as if he understood. After solving his curiosity, Sejong looked back at Hyang and Choi Hae-san to answer other questions. The armor the soldiers in Area 51 were wearing was unique. Is that also made here? Yes, Abama. I'd like to see that too. All right. In accordance with King Sejong's orders, Kyang gave orders to the officers of the military flag and craftsmen. At the command of the township, the craftsmen who were making the barrels stopped what they were doing and stood up. Huh. As King Sejong's head was twisted, the Sint explained the reason. I'm sorry. There aren't enough craftsmen. Oh no. Tisk. In response to Hyang's response, Sejong clicked his tongue as if regretful. Seeing King Sejong like that, the ministers who accompanied him became restless and muttered. Is this making you increasingly anxious? You will definitely be asking for measures. Leaving behind the minister's anxiety, King Sejong followed the craftsmen to the place where armor was made. Kihi. That's right. When King Sejong arrived at the place where the armor was made and saw the craftsmen making the armor, he burst into laughter. To Huang He's question, King answered, I take pictures. And now, the craftsmen were literally printing it. The first thing that caught Sejong's eyes was the part that covered the chest. When a thin, red-hot iron plate is placed on a large cast iron frame, another craftsman turns a large pulley and places another cast iron frame on top. Heicha. As the two frames overlapped, the young craftsman pushed down the handle attached to the upper frame with all his might, accompanied by a cheering sound. The end of the handle was curved into a semicircle, and the more he pressed the handle, the more the most protruding part of the semicircle went down, and he pressed the frame. In this way, the two frames were completely attached, and after some time had passed, the craftsman lifted the handle upward and turned the pulley to separate the two frames. When the frame was separated, the craftsman standing next to him took out the iron plate with tongs. The iron plate that came out of the mold was in the shape of a perfect breastplate. Kihi, King Sejong, who saw the armor being made using an extraordinary method, burst into laughter and continued watching. The helmet to be used with the armor, and even the visor with the visor, were made from a single iron plate. King Sejong, who could only laugh at the completely unexpected and ingenious method, asked the craftsman a question. What a mysterious method! Whose idea was it? In response to King Sejong's question, the attention of the craftsmen and officials all focused on Hyang. Sejong looked at the Sint with a helpless face. You again? D-hat. King Sejong, who had seen the process of making armor, tried to see where silver was made, but the incense stopped him. I'm sorry, but you can't see where the silver is made right now. Why? Because extremely dangerous substances such as mercury and acid are used, the personnel in charge also bring designated equipment and work only for a certain period of time. Is that so? TSK. Sejong, who had lost his appetite in disappointment, looked elsewhere. He toured a place where traditional weapons such as bows and arrows were made and praised the craftsmen. But King Sejong's expression was very sour. "Your Majesty, it is very late. Your return to the palace." In response to the words of the accompanying merchant marine, King Sejong looked at the clock hanging on the wall of the military ensign and nodded. "I guess so. Let's quickly prepare to return to the palace." "Yes, Your Majesty." As King Sejong and the ministers were riding horses to return to the palace, a soldier carrying a large bag approached Hyang. Hyang nodded after checking the contents of the bag, and the soldier handed the bag to Choi Hae-san. "Good job." As Choi Hae-san was being handed the bag, another soldier held out a wooden paddle to Hyang and Choi Hae-san. "This is the new ticket you will use tomorrow." "Thank you." When Hyang, who had put the sacred mark in his arms, got on the horse, King Sejong, who was watching the scene, asked a question. "I understand Shinpyo, but what is that bag?" "Here are the armor and the drawings of General Führer. Every morning I go to the military encyclopedia, and every evening I retrieve them and bring them back." "Then where do you put the drawing?" "It is stored in a safe built in the deepest part of the Eastern Palace." "You pay a lot of attention to security. Then, let's go back to the palace." While returning to class, Huang He called the Hojo judge. "Captain Hopan, contact Hojo and ask him to prepare a report on the iron contribution. You can see it as soon as you enter the palace." "Yes." When we return to the palace, it is certain that His Highness the Prime Minister will discuss the mass production of new weapons, including the President's. So, we must prepare in advance. "Ah, I see." Pansio Hojo gave an order to the official who came with him. After receiving the order, the Hojo official left the procession and rode toward Yukjo Street. King Sejong, who returned to the palace, behaved as Huang Hui expected. "Looking at the demonstration today, the weapons made in Area 51 are truly powerful. What do you think?" "That's true. In particular, the power of Bijeok Jinshinro can be considered the best in the world. President Jiang's power is incomparable to that of President Ming." The ministers all agreed with King Sejong's assessment. When the ministers agreed, King Sejong got straight to the point. "So, I would like to mass-produce this. What do you think?" Well, the ministers avoided giving a direct answer to King Sejong's words and began to make calculations. Meanwhile, Huang He looked back at Hojo Judge. Popan, who received Huang He's gaze, said something to the eunuch. After a while, a book was placed in the eunuch's hand. Pansio Hojo, who received the book, reported it to King Sejong. "This is the amount of iron that the government received in tribute last year. First, let's take a look at what catches the eye. Cheonju has 6,533 gun of Jeoncheol, Sewuso, and Ulsan has 12,500 gun of Senkyeol, cast iron. So, if you look at it comprehensively, the Gunjagam and Songgongam, organs in charge of civil engineering and architecture, annually produce 130,000 gun, approximate 78 tons, are in use or in stock, and the inventory held by each province is approximately 600,000 gun, approximately 385 tons. Is it a combination of both pure and raw iron?" "That's right." Sejong, who was thinking while stroking his beard, looked back at the scent. "With this amount of quantity, wouldn't it be possible to mass-produce it even with a bit of strain?" Hyang immediately answered King Sejong's question. "The quantity may be possible, but mass production is difficult. This is because the number of craftsmen is too small. Wouldn't it be okay to recruit more craftsmen from private houses?" In response to Sejong's question, he explained why incense was not possible. "I did an experiment with a lightning bolt." The experiment that Hyang mentioned was the outsourcing of the bullet body part of Bijeok Jinshinro. It was an experiment in which casting prototypes were given to blacksmith shops in and around Hanseong and received delivery. The review continued over the first and second rounds. The first standard is that products produced at the same blacksmith shop can be assembled together. The second standard was that it could be assembled with products produced in other blacksmith shops. If I copied the given prototype correctly, I could pass not only the first round but also the second round. There are a total of 14 blacksmiths mobilized for the experiment, of which 8 passed the first standard and 3 passed the second standard. And most of the Bijeok Jinshinro to be used in the test were made from those 3 blacksmiths. If we consider this example, blacksmiths with sufficient skills should be considered 20% of the total. There are so many enemies. The simplest Bijeok Jinshinro cost 20%. The guns that need to be made more skillfully would cost less than 10%. If we had to mobilize blacksmiths from private homes, only Bijeok Jinshinro and armor would be possible. Sejong looked despondent in response to Hyang's response. Sejong, who was faced with a more negative situation than expected, gestured to his ministers with a tired face. I want you to think of a way to resolve this situation. That's all for today. That day, King Sejong did not visit Hyang's room. Hyang, who had been waiting just in case, returned to his seat with a bitter look on his face. You must be shocked. Reality is a gutter. By the way, do you know that you are throwing everything away and giving up? There was a reason why Hyang said that. Sejong is 27 years old. It was still a time when both experience were shallow. The next morning, King Sejong gathered his ministers together. When all the ministers gathered, King Sejong opened his mouth. Gwaine thought about it carefully, and I think that the production of long guns and horse barrels should not be delayed. However, I don't think it would be a good solution to leave it all to the sense of military discipline. So Gwaine thought of a way to solve this problem. When King Sejong announced that he had created a countermeasure, the local government and ministers focused on King Sejong. The method Gwaine came up with was to receive the barrel of the gapja chongtong from blacksmiths throughout Joseon, the body of the gapja chongtong from ranchers, and the brass parts from gunsmiths. In the case of masang chongtong, only the important engine parts are made by the gunjigam, and only the barrel, and wooden parts are paid for in the same way. The crown prince must write down the exact specifications for these parts and report them. We will print this, distribute it to artisans, and use it as a judging standard. Abama. If you do that, there is a higher chance of confidential information being leaked. King Sejong immediately responded to the protest. What we receive from blacksmiths is limited to parts that are just before processing. The Führer's iron body is only delivered until the grooves are dug, that is, the process of straightening and smoothing the inside and the part where the screws are cut. After the grooves are dug, the parts are delivered. The combination and final assembly is carried out with a sense of discipline. At King Sejong's words, the local government and ministers began to calculate their profits and losses. While moving the scales around and making calculations, Wang He pointed out a problem. If you receive it as a tribute from blacksmiths, there may be a quality problem. Weapons are the most important part of national defense, so the quality problem must be resolved. King Sejong immediately responded to Huang He's words. It is not accepted as a public contribution. Nowadays, monopoly stores under the direct control of the Hojo are being established across the country. Necessary items are purchased through these monopoly stores. This makes the lives of the people richer by circulating wealth, and at the same time, public figures use their karma as a living. The goal is to make more and more people become merchants and public figures. A war of words broke out between the local government and ministers over King Sejong's plan. Although there were some ministers who opposed it, Hyang was the first to express his approval, and as the government officials also showed their support, it was decided to follow King Sejong's will. In order to realize the supremacy of the priesthood, Ryu Zhonghayan and the old gods who resisted were purged, and King Sejong declared the execution of Jiangjang. As the stubborn old subjects were swept away, the pendulum of power clearly tilted towards King Sejong. And thanks to this, King Sejong was able to run the government according to his will. As time passed and summer approached, King Sejong called his ministers. Now that Princess Jeongai has reached her age, how about finding out her sire? I think it's a really good time. Then let's find out. I follow your orders. The ministers responded cheerfully to King Sejong's orders. This was because they were keenly aware that a slope was needed to cover up bad times. The main character, Princess Jeongai, was the one who dominated the cuteness of her royal family. When she heard the rumor, looking for Princess Jeongai's sire, Kang smiled. Your sister Yule is getting married? Many of the elders will be upset. Kang's evaluation of his sister, Princess Jeongai, was simple. Affiliation is at its peak. Insa of Insa, Princess Jeongai's friendliness was such that when Hyang, wrapped in a swaddle, first met Princess Jeongai, he was confused by her cuteness shown to adults. Is this gentleman also from the 21st century? As rumors circulated that the monks of Sungjiangwan had begun looking for candidates for sire, Princess Jeongai lashed out at King Sejong. Abba Mama. The girl wants to continue living with Abba Mama and Iya Mama. King Sejong smiled and stroked Princess Jeongai's head. Wouldn't it be me? But, when the time comes, it would be natural to meet a partner and start a family. As King Sejong spoke, tears began to form in Princess Jeongai's eyes. Girl, if I had a wish, I would just like to be with Mama and Abama just a little longer. Although King Sejong had a stern expression on his face, Princess Jeongai protested to King Sejong with tearful eyes. Girl, I hate it. I'm going to keep living with Abima and Iamamama. Uh-huh. This guy. Why is he being so upset? Abima, I hate you. Princess Jeongai left her seat and left with those words. Jeongai. King Sejong called, but Princess Jeongai did not even look back. Seeing that, King Sejong looked back at Queen Sohyun with a dejected expression. That's right. Queen Sohyun smiled warmly at King Sejong's expression and made an excuse for the princess. He's still a child, isn't he? He lives at the home of Vice Admiral Han Jae, Lee Myung-jaeon, for more than half the year, so he probably wants to be away from his parents. At that time, the Joseon royal family had a custom of leaving young princes and princesses to be raised in the homes of ministers. According to this custom, Princess Jeongai also lived in Lee Myung-jaeon's house. When King Sejong could not hide his sad expression, Queen Sohyun comforted him. Don't worry too much. Sokyop will console Jeongai's heart. Please. Sigh. She said that it was her child who didn't get her way, and in the end, even Queen Sohyun came forward, but Princess Jeongai stubbornly refused. The princess has stopped crying. King Sejong was greatly surprised when he heard the news that Princess Jeongai had begun a hunger strike. What did the queen say? You're trying to persuade the princess right now, but she's so stubborn. Oh my huh. After receiving the merchant ship's report, King Sejong let out a long sigh. Now that one guy is quiet, another guy. The next day, Princess Jeongai's residence in Gyeongbokgung Palace. Mama, Your Majesty, the Crown Prince has arrived. When the lady-in-waiting announced the arrival of incense, Princess Jeongai responded in a dying voice. Mozijira. Yes, Mama. After Princess Jeongai's permission was given, the court ladies opened the door and bowed deeply to Hyang. There are a lot of hardships. I am devastated. As soon as Hyang entered, the door was closed, and Hyang walked in stride to the blanket where Princess Jeongai was lying, then sat down and called out to the princess. Wow, you're having a hard time too. At Hyang's words, Princess Jeongai threw away the blanket and stood upright. That's it. Give it to me. That's right, Deske. Hyang clicked his tongue lightly, searched through his sleeves, and produced a paper bag containing corn taffy and a paper bag containing honey rice cake. All of the taffy and rice cakes were bought at the market after leaving the palace wearing fragrant clothes. Hyang clicked his tongue slightly as he watched Princess Jeongai chewing on the sweetmeat she had taken out from the paper bag. SK. That's right. Is this the original palace situation in a palace where there is so much to eat? Be quiet. Do you think Abima will break her stubbornness if we don't do this? Just find a decent woman and marry her. If you do something wrong, you will be called an old maid. Noisy. I'm doing this all for you. Yes? Hyang's head was twisted at the unexpected words. Princess Jeongai burped as if her stomach was full from all the taffy and rice cake. Ooh, I guess I'll survive now. That's right. The princess has no body. No thanks. Yes, let's go. But why are you suddenly dragging me in? Even if I go when I go, Prince you, I will leave that damned guy human. Oh my. Hyang had to smile bitterly at Princess Jeongai's words. Princess Jeongai, recorded as Princess Jeongso in the original history, was King Sejong's first child. In the original history, her posthumous name was given as Princess Jeongai, but she was later changed to Princess Jeongso because she was said to be like her aunt. Originally, she should have died last winter, but the person who survived through Hyang's cowpox vaccination was Princess Jeongai. She was one of the variables created by the interference of her scent. Princess Jeongai's position in the royal family was significant because she was the eldest daughter. Of all of King Sejong's legitimate and illegitimate children, none of whom were born yet, Princess Jeongai was the eldest. Thanks to that, Princess Jeongai was someone whom King Sejong and his wife had special affection for. Princess Jeongai's personality also played a role. Princess Jeongai loved her affability to the extent that she was said to be the most popular person among people. King Taejong and his wife loved her before their deaths, and not only Grand Prince Hyeryong, but also Yang Neong, who had a difficult relationship with King Sejong, also loved her. In this way, Jeongai dominated the cuteness of the adults in the royal family, but to her younger siblings, she was a slightly different person. King evaluated Princess Jeongai like this. Military-based leader, perhaps because of King Sejong's blood. Princess Jeongai was also quite clever. Perhaps because of Lee Seong-gye's bloodline, he was quite active. However, from an early age, Jong-hai realized her position and what her job was, and severely scolded her younger siblings when they misbehaved. The most unfortunate thing for those younger siblings was that Hyang was the reference point for Jeongai. I know full well that Hyang is not a fan, but even taking that into account, you guys are too spoiled. Princess Jeongai severely scolded her younger siblings if they showed even the slightest misbehavior. She was so strict that Queen Sohyun scolded Princess Jeongai when she saw her scolding her younger siblings. I won't criticize you for disciplining your younger siblings, but aren't you being too strict? When Queen Sohyun said it was too much, Princess Jeongai responded with a firm voice. Mama, those children are the precious children of Yuma Mama and Abama, and they are also my cute younger siblings, but at the same time, they are noble princes and princesses. How can it be that such princes and princesses, instead of setting an example, take the lead in causing trouble? Will you let it go? As the eldest daughter of the royal family, the girl can never be tolerated. Queen Sohyun could only sigh at Princess Jeongai's firm answer. Hut! The image of the eldest son overlapped with the image of the eldest son, who even got hit on the calf by King Sejong. Queen Sohyun lamented, placing her hand on her forehead. Jeongai or Sejana? The person who got scolded the most by Princess Jeongai was Yu, Grand Prince Suyong, followed by Yong, Grand Prince Ampyeong. In Yu's case, it was difficult to deny that the environmental impact was significant. Princess Jong, who was immediately above Yu, entered the palace with King Sejong and his wife, and Yong, his younger brother, was born in the palace. However, at the time, Yu was too young to travel long distances, so he had to live in Saga until he was 5 years old and entered the palace. Thanks to his status as a prince, there were few people who said anything. Thanks to this, he had a fairly free-spirited personality and also showed an arrogant temperament. Because you had this kind of personality, it was common for him to cause trouble of one kind or another even after entering the palace. And as time passed, dragons began to join in on the trouble. Kiang, the eldest brother, was already planning big things with King Sejong and other ministers, and as Yong reached an age where he liked to cause trouble, Yu and Jeff began to get along well. And Princess Jeongai was not one to ignore this situation. As soon as she heard that Yu and Yong had caused trouble, Jeongai became friendly towards them. Knowing full well that if she was called by Zhang Hai, she would be scolded to the point of shedding tears, the two immediately ran away. But every time they did so, Zhang Hai grabbed the hem of her skirt and chased them away. Stand up. And if you were caught like that, it was natural that you would be scolded several times. As this happened repeatedly, Princess Jeongai became like a tiger to Hyang's younger siblings, unable to move as soon as she stood in front of them. As soon as she heard the rumor about saving her sire, Jeongai set one goal. I will completely correct Yu's habits before I get married. Either way, due to Princess Jeongai's hunger strike, the decision on Bumadoi was postponed. There was an uproar over hunger, but it was also because King Sejong also regretted marrying off Jeongai early. There is still time until Jeongai's coming-of-age ceremony, so let's postpone it a little later. I follow your orders. In response to King Sejong's decision to postpone saving his sire, the ministers gathered in groups of 2s and 3s to talk. His Majesty the Lord is also very gentle with his children. Aren't you your favorite princess? Since Jeongai had a good image among the ministers, no minister said anything. If you're just worried, if we do this wrong, we could get very busy with the royal wedding. That's right. As soon as the selection of the sire is completed, the wedding of the crown prince will be approaching. Meanwhile, Yu's face turned pale when he heard the news that Princess Jeongai's selection of the sire has been postponed. He was the one who cheered the most when he heard the news. Princess Jeongai's sire is being found. After a while, it will be my world. Upon hearing the news that the person who had treated him most severely would soon leave the palace, Yu felt like he had the world. However, when she recently heard the news that the sire selection had been postponed, her eyes darkened and her whole body began to tremble. I'm dead, what should I do? Yu's nightmare is not over yet. It was even noticeable that oil prices were in a panic. That's because Yu, who had been showing signs of deterioration little by little as the rumor of sire selection began to spread, immediately returned to being a quiet model student. It looks like there is such a thing as a natural enemy. Kiang, who was watching Yu and Yong quietly sitting and studying, burst into laughter. As for the scent, there were no complaints. Although it was different from the original history, it was still a very good thing for him that there was definitely an entity that Suyang was afraid of. By the way, if my sister gets married, will I be next? Kiang put down the pen and leaned against the backrest. The bottom line, this is really troubling. How do I get the choice? I can't just get married for 3 generations like in the original. Kiang was deeply troubled by the large-scale event that was becoming a reality. Kiang, who had been thinking about various things, suddenly became curious. By the way, did this gentleman in the original become a virtuous person because his marriage was a mess? Or was it because he was a nerd and his marriage was a mess? It was a scent that made him curious as he recalled a story he had heard in Korean history class. However, there was something that the scent did not recognize, or rather refused to recognize. It was a person living in the 21st century who had no relationship with the opposite sex and was a fan of terminal symptoms that even doctors had given up on. During his school days, especially in college, he was not approached by female classmates at all due to his legendary virtue, and later on, he suffered from the so-called sour grape syndrome, to put it bluntly, mental victory, and built a wall around himself with women. Sour grape syndrome was a common symptom among terminally ill patients. It was compared to the fox in Aesop's fable, the fox and the sour grapes. The reason I don't have luck with women is because my eyes are too high. I have to lower my standards, but it's not easy, right? Ha ha ha. This was the same for sense in the 21st century. And it was the same even now when I was reincarnated in the Joseon dynasty. Until recently, Hyang had been worried about her marriage, but once she founded the research center and started working as a teacher in earnest, her thoughts about marriage were thrown away to Andromeda. While there was a commotion over the search for the princess's sire, the court was also in turmoil. The cause of the uproar was the candy monopoly. The reselling of candy has been concluded, but what method would be best to resell it? The ministers immediately answered King Sejong's question. We believe it is best to hand over retail rights to appropriate merchants. After that, the ministers argued, saying, I like Song Sang, and I like Jiangang Merchant. To King Sejong's ears, it sounded like, I received it from Song Sang. I received it from Jiangang Merchant. King Sejong's face became increasingly fierce as he watched the ministers quietly arguing. Finally, Sejong hit Seoin with his fist and shouted, Go! The ministers who had been arguing in response to King Sejong's shouting closed their mouths and immediately bowed down. King Sejong's criticism continued over the heads of those ministers. Are the police officers listening to the words of the officers and thinking properly? How many days has it been since I declared that I would be a police officer and spoke about the administrative measures and preparations for the police officer? Here comes the emperor. Look back at the answers the officials gave to the question asked by the officials just now. Is the response for the officials really for the officials? Or is it for the gifts that will come to the officials' homes? Is this an answer for Joseon? Or is it for the officials' treasury? Is this the answer for? In response to King Sejong's criticism, the ministers all bowed down and bowed their heads. Please kill me. Please kill me. The ministers, who were all shouting kill me in unison, began to break into a cold sweat as King Sejong continued. They are asking me to kill them. They are asking me to kill them. I will decide how to make this policy, see the results, and decide whether or not to grant their wishes. OMG. The ministers, frightened by King Sejong's warning, raised their voices all at once. I will do my best. I will dedicate my entire name to you. King Sejong, who was watching the ministers trembling and answering, glared at the ministers prostrating in front. I will tell the ministers. The reason the governor placed the ministers in the position of ministers was because he believed in their evaluation. However, the governor is a bit disappointed these days. Here comes the emperor. Please kill me. The monks fell flat on their faces to the ground and bowed their heads. King Sejong's eyes were cold as he looked at those officials. I don't want to disappoint you any further than this. I am warning you, if you are not as good as the rumors I heard about you, there is no reason for you to put them in their place. Do you understand? Left counselor and right counselor. I will keep each bone in mind. We will never disappoint you. Huang He and Meng Sasong, who were publicly singled out, responded with pale faces full of cold sweat. In contrast to the frozen atmosphere of the ministers, King Sejong conducted the meeting in a dry voice. Okay then, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. Yes, next item on the agenda. Next. Tisk. King Sejong clicked his tongue as he looked at the ministers, hurriedly checking the next agenda. I didn't like the sight of him flustering at all. As Hyang had a reincarnation and began interfering in earnest, many variables arose. Some of those variables were expected, but many were unexpected. One of the unexpected variables was that King Sejong's evaluation standards in relation to his ministers had become extremely high. Why can't a child who just turned 10 think of doing something like that? Why can't you think of it first? If I had to tell you everything in advance, wouldn't there be a reason to put them in the positions of ministers and magistrates? As it is compared to fragrances that come up with solutions on their own, and sometimes in advance, The standard for evaluating Sejong has become fragrances, and the victims of the increased hurdles were Huang He and Meng Sasong. I heard from Abima that you have outstanding abilities. The people around you also said the same thing. But why? They were capable people recognized by King Taejong, King Sejong's father. However, King Sejong, who examined the work abilities of the two men after placing them in the position of political minister, could not hide his disappointment. Am I too biased? Or was my evaluation of the two people too generous? There are many people who say the same thing for me to say the latter, and I can clearly see that their skills are lacking for me to say the former. Sejong had to worry deeply when he saw Huang He and Meng Sasong showing abilities that were below his expectations. Can we really entrust such an important responsibility to them? For the success of the police station, we need someone who is better than anyone else. As Sejong's disappointment grew, Huang He and Meng Sasong also felt like they were dying. Since famous senior ministers took their seats after being purged, they had to do their best to survive and maintain power. However, as soon as they sat down in their seats, what they encountered was a huge wall called Jiangjing. What the hell? That family is full of monsters. Huang He, who had read all 20 books related to police officers, drank alcohol with Meng Sasong and lamented. If the previous king, Taejong, maintained his power through a reign of terror and oppressed his subjects, Tangyim Joseon was oppressing his subjects with work. This wasn't just a matter of throwing things away, it was all organized to a level of perfection that made it difficult to mess with it. And then the ministers were evaluating what to do. If the ministers simply followed suit, they would become a waste of money that would eat up the budget. In order to be worthy of the title of minister, one had to find shortcomings in the government policy and improve them. In the case of Jongsun, it was necessary to create an improvement plan that could produce more than just supplementary results. Of course, all of these were not standards that King Sejong officially set out clearly. However, he could feel it clearly every time he looked at the measures put forward by the ministers. And rumors about him had already spread throughout the city. After finishing the day's work, the men who were emptying the rice bowl at the tavern brought up the topic of chaman as a snack for drinks. Do you know the most commonly heard word on Yukjo Street these days? Is this the best? You got it right. Well, now it's my turn. Do you know what the next common word is? Compared to what I heard. That's it. And finally, keske deske. Fuaha. The men who were talking laughed loudly and emptied their glasses. This was because it was something that would ruin the arrogance of the proud nobleman. However, the expressions on the faces of the noblemen, who happened to hear the rumor, were not very good. In fact, that was the most common thing they heard from their boss. And the first place was Sejong. Is this best? Every time King Sejong asked this question, the ministers had to sweat. And Huang He and Meng Sasong added one more sentence. Compared to what I've heard. Finally, Sejong clicked his tongue as he nervously put away the report. In the end, they were two people who had a strong desire to resign even after only a few months of ascending to the throne. I want to hit you. In the end, the ministers who were criticized by King Sejong had to use their brains to find new measures. As expected, shouldn't we be dispatched directly from Hojo? From Hojo? The 8 roads of Joseon? How far? For Monopoly to work properly, you have to reach at least Dohobu. If that happens, Hojo's government office will be empty. Then what should we do? If we suggest leaving it to the merchants, we will all be fired. No, it would be nice if I could just get fired. Have you forgotten what happened in the past? All the ministers knew that what King Sejong wanted was for Hojo to oversee the affairs directly. However, realistically, the number of officials was insufficient, so they were unable to give a clear answer and were going around in circles. In the end, Huang He stepped forward to resolve the situation, which was like spinning on a squirrel wheel. Let's look at the past. See the past? As King Sejong stroked his beard and blurted out his words, Huang He explained in more detail. That's right. In order to properly expand finances through monopoly, the Hojo must have direct jurisdiction. However, the number of officials currently in the Hojo is too low. So, we are supplementing the number through the civil service examination. Huang He's explanation continued, but King Sejong's expression did not improve much. After thinking for a moment, Sejong tossed to Hyang. It's a little lacking. Crown Prince, what is your opinion? Hyang, who received the toss from Sejong, answered right away. Implementing the past is a good thing, but it is time-consuming and expensive. That's right. So, if I were to express Soja's opinion, I would say that Sunkyungkwan's Confucian students should be put into practical work immediately. The Confucian students of Sunkyungkwan? Yes, Abama. Think about what happened last year. Imin Nyan? Because it's Limin 9. In the fourth year of King Sejong's reign, the governor of Jeolla province filed an appeal. Sungkyunkwan students who cared for old and sick parents were appointed as deans in their hometowns to support their parents. However, they are restricting the civil service exam due to the insufficient number of days of attendance at Sungkyunkwan. Please resolve this issue. After hearing the appeal, King Sejong made it possible for Sungkyunkwan students who took care of their elderly parents to see the past, regardless of the number of days of attendance. When Sejong nodded as if he remembered, Kang continued speaking. The biggest goal of Sungkyunkwan Confucian students is to pass a major exam and become a government official. So what's the problem with putting them into practice a few years early? Huang He interrupted Hyang's words. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's words appear to be correct at first glance, but what is the reason for holding such a large punishment? It is to select people with excellent abilities. If you are a Sungkyunkwan Confucian student and are unconditionally sent to a government position, you may end up giving a bad name to an incompetent person. When Huang He pointed out the problem, Kang looked dumbfounded. What are the exams that Sungkyunkwan Confucian students take every month? Shouldn't those with excellent grades be selected first? Also, it would be better to think of this as a type of exam. Wouldn't the administration run smoothly if it was managed by people who know the business well? Some ministers sighed and nodded when they heard the word practical. In particular, the heads of the magistrate and magistrate in charge of Hojo were nodding loudly. Meanwhile, Kang's words continued. In particular, there is a reason why students must take a look at work related to the budget. This is because those who know the importance of the budget well are better able to create proper policies rather than just speculation. Therefore, this will be the most important exam. I believe what you said is correct. In response to Hyang's rebuttal, Huang He had to wave the white flag. Sejong, who was watching this, came to a conclusion, issuing an order to Sungkyunkwan to protect the officials of the Hojo. Thus, establish a monopoly office under the direct control of the Hojo to at least the core level. I follow your orders. The ministers responded to King Sejong's decision by bowing their heads. It was a natural result that the voice of the Hojo judge, who decided to supplement manpower, was the loudest. However, Huang He's face was wrinkled. This was because King Sejong's view of Huang He was not very favorable. In the end, Huang He, who left the group that day, had to vent her anger by drinking heavily. Damn rich people. As monopoly offices under the direct control of the Hojo were being created across the country, an urgent message came from the Ming dynasty. Emperor Ming is dead. Emperor Yongle was dead. After receiving the urgent report, King Sejong discussed countermeasures with his ministers. Please form a condolence group as soon as possible. I follow your orders. Do you know anything about the crown prince who will become the new emperor? The ministers became speechless at King Sejong's question. Sejong clicked his tongue at that sight. Tisk! As soon as King Sejong clicked his tongue, the ministers shouted conditionally, Here comes the emperor. That's it. Sirs, immediately find a brave contemplative and add him to the condolence group. And among the medical doctors, select someone who is good at diagnosis and have him join the condolence group. I follow your orders. While a delegation was hastily organized to mourn the death of Emperor Yongrak, King Sejong visited the incense. Are you going to get the book through this envoy as well? I'm not an envoy to good things, but I can't miss the opportunity, can I? When the Shanghai building in Shandong is completed, it won't be so busy then. I see. Sejong, who was nodding at Hyang's answer, reached into his sleeve, took out a piece of paper, and handed it to Hyang. Then, please get some books related to this. Yes? Yes. After receiving the piece of paper and reading its contents, Hyang looked at Sejong with round eyes. Abama, is phonology the right thing to do? Right. No way. Already? Hyang barely managed to control her trembling heart and asked Sejong the reason. Abama. Soja. May I ask about the condensed milk? It's because I'm frustrated. It's frustrating. The ministers who fill the Pyongyang are ministers in name only. They are thieves. Is there any need for ministers if they only do what they are told? We need new people. But, looking at the situation in Joseon, that too. It's not easy. Sejong shook his head and sighed before continuing. There are too few people. No, there are many smart people, but there will be more than one person buried because they don't know the damn Chinese characters. If that's the case, if we create and distribute characters that they can easily learn, they will have a chance, and I, too, will be able to get a chance. If we can save them, wouldn't it be a win-win? Hyang nodded at Sejong's explanation without realizing it. However, I wanted to know more about the scent. But why phonology? The letters you saw in the books you found were all letters that express sounds. I thought it would be easier to read and understand if they express sounds rather than expressing meaning. In that case, wouldn't it be okay for Abama to give the order herself? Sejong burst into laughter at Hyang's question. Those damn ministers will just ignore that. In this way, Hyang became Sejong's purchasing agent. After the condolence group departed for Beijing, King Sejong's message was delivered to Sukyeongkwan. So, I recommend that students studying at Sukyeongkwan follow Gwane's orders. The governor who read the royal decree looked at the Confucian scholars. What is the reason you are studying at Sukyeongkwan? Isn't it so that you can advance to the civil service and revitalize Joseon? A good opportunity has come, so don't delay entering the civil service. After finishing what he had to say, the governor left Myeongryundae. After the governor left, the remaining members began to chat loudly. Hyung Lee, what do you plan to do? Hyung Kim, who are you? I plan to enter the civil service examination. It's already been 5 years since I stayed at Sukyeongkwan, and I'm not confident about my exams next year, so I can't miss this opportunity. Me too. My parents are going through a hard time, so I think this will be a good opportunity. Many of the students staying at Sukyeongkwan decided to enter the military service, but there were also many who did not. If I were to enter the civil service now, it would be a disgrace to the 9th grade, so why would I enter the civil service? That's foolish. You're right. If you were born as a boy and dreamed of entering the civil service, shouldn't you start with the 6th grade? Ha ha ha. Looking at the Joseon system at the time, the number of people selected through Daegwo was 33. Among them, the most senior person who had passed the civil service examination began with the 6th rank of servant, and the rest were divided into Gapyeolbayon, based on their grades, and their grades were determined. According to that classification, the 23 people who passed the lowest military service examination started with the 9th rank. The lowest class, 9th rank, were those who entered through miscellaneous departments or through reporting. In other words, those who are making such a fuss right now are aiming to pass the civil service exam. However, among those who made such a fuss, only a few actually had that level of skill. Most of them were children of wealthy families. What was important to them was the signboard that said Sukyeongkwan Confucian Scholars. Even with that alone, at least 3 generations could maintain the title of nobleman and receive tax exemption benefits. Hojo Pansio, which compiled a list of Sukyeongkwan students who volunteered to run for public office, immediately handed the list to the officials. How many people are there in total? There are 143 people. The expressions of the officials became complicated at the answer of Judge Hojo. I think I made a good save, but I don't know why I feel so uncomfortable. I agree. The number of students attending Sukyeongkwan is 200. Among them, 143 people applied, which was quite a large number. However, both Hojo Pansio, who wrote the list, and the officials who checked the list, all felt itchy in the back of their heads. In the end, Yang Wijing Lee Jik took care of the list. Anyway, these are the people who came forward within the designated date, so let's report this to the chief minister. I guess so. Tisk. King Sejong's first reaction after checking the list submitted by the officials was to click his tongue. 143 people? I know that Sukyeongkwan's capacity is 200, but you didn't apply for the rest? That's right. Why? Pansio Hojo answered King Sejong's question. He said the reason he stays at Sukyeongkwan is because he aims to major in college. Before Pansio Hojo finished speaking, King Sejong clicked his tongue. As soon as he did that, Judge Hojo bowed his head. Here comes the emperor. Is there anything that the Lord should be upset about? It's just that I don't like the members of Sukyeongkwan, who are supposed to be the talented people who will be responsible for the government in the future. It's because their perspective is so narrow. Tisk. When Sejong clicked his tongue, Hwang He intervened. Whatever the case, as King Sejong said, Sukyeongkwan students were the future of the government. I still have very little experience. What nonsense! The breadth and narrowness of one's perspective is not a matter of experience, but of qualifications. Does the Lord intend to fill the government with such people? Hwang He had to bow down to King Sejong's criticism. Your Majesty, God, please forgive my mistake. Why is Abama like that? Tisk. Here comes the emperor. Hwang He had to bow her head even more at Sejong's words. Sejong, who was glaring at Hwang He, asked Judge Hojo a question. Sukyeongkwan aside. What will we do in the future? First of all, Sukyeongkwan students will learn industry and commerce. The period is scheduled for about 3 months. 3 months. It's September now, so are you starting the resale business next year? That's right. In the meantime, we will secure a stock of candy and build a building to house the retail store. King Sejong nodded in response to Judge Hojo's answer. That's appropriate. Then how should we allocate personnel? First of all, we will place the house doctors, 3rd rank, in the 8th province, then the vice and Didohabu, and the seinen generals, 4th rank, in the neck. Lastly, the left and right officers will be placed in the dohobu and the military. King Sejong stroked his beard and tried to gauge the explanation given by Judge Hojo. The rank is lower than that of local governors, including governors. We have taken into account the morale issues of local leaders. Right? King Sejong nodded in response to Judge Hojo's answer. Starting with governors, they were placed as people of lower rank than local leaders, thus avoiding irritating the pride of local leaders. However, this did not mean that his rank was so low that local leaders looked down on him. And since it was an institution directly connected to the government, local leaders would not be able to treat it carelessly. As a result, the Hanseong government had another means of inspecting local officials. It will be difficult for local officials to sleep comfortably. However, King Sejong continued to barrage questions to Judge Hojo. It's a good method, but wouldn't there be a shortage of people in that class to send it that way? That's right. So, we will select officials with good performance evaluations and first give them false grades. Then, those fake grades will look at their work results for 1 year and decide whether to change them to real grades, promote them, or demote them. It's coming. If you were assigned to a retail store, did you work for at least 1 year? That's right. No matter how long I work, I don't plan on being stationed in one place for more than 2 years. Salt and candy were sold at the monopoly. As these were almost essential items in the people's diet, it was certain that a great deal of wealth would be exchanged, and considering additional matters to come in the future, it was essential to prevent corruption by continuously rotating officials. So, will Sungkyunkwan students fill the void left by the officials? First of all, existing officials will be promoted to fill the void. The method is the same as for officials going to foreign monopoly offices. Sungkyunkwan students will be assigned work by giving them false grades based on their grades during the training period. It's coming. How much do you plan to give to the students at Sungkyunkwan? It starts from the 9th grade and goes up to the 6th grade. It's the 6th grade. Sejong measured it again. Previously, the point at which those who had passed the Daegwajang-1 examination began their official service was the Jong 6th rank. However, although it was a fake grade, it was a genuine 6th grade, 1 grade higher than that. It was planned to gradually increase the number of officials in the future, but even with that increase, the standards for the promotion process were also scheduled to become increasingly strict. Sejong, who was predicting possibilities based on the personnel plan and future plans presented by Hojo, looked at the Hojo board. Everyone will work desperately. That's the purpose. After hearing Judge Hojo's answer, King Sejong came to a conclusion. Good. Follow the Hojo judge's plan. I follow your orders. But, even though it is a false grade, pay the green salary according to the grade. If the work is difficult, you should at least pay the green salary well. I will keep this in mind. Later, after hearing this plan, King muttered with a bitter expression. Whether it's the 21st century or Joseon, interns must be desperate. And, those who decided to stay at Sungkyunkwan had to hit the ground running and regret it. It's a 6th rank. Meanwhile, a large-scale influx of new members into Hojo caused a stir. The reason for the uproar was the Myeonsinri, Manchinli. As a large number of new students came in from Sungkyunkwan and existing officials were promoted, the superiors did not sit still. When all kinds of strange things happened despite the fact that a grandiose banquet was to be prepared and served, an appeal was filed with the Sahianbu. Such cheeky. Upon hearing the appeal, King Sejong burst into anger. The horrors of Myeonsinri have been famous since ancient times, and the kings of Joseon tried to eliminate this evil practice for generations. King Sejong himself had punished officials who had performed Myeonsinri in the year before, 1423. It was just last year that the Gwain issued an order banning the wedding ceremony. Have you seen these cheeky writers? Hopan, what on earth did the Lord do? In response to King Sejong's scolding, Hojo's office fell to the ground. Please kill me. What did the monks do? Due to King Sejong's criticism, the monks had to cling to the ground. Please kill me. What did those rude people who practiced Myeonsinri do? First of all, stay at home. Sangseon, call Wigumbu Jinmu immediately. Yes, Your Highness. King Sejong was furious and all the officials who had performed the Myeonsinri were imprisoned in Wigumbu prison. After receiving the report, King Sejong gritted his teeth and glared at the ministers. It is a law that the orders given by the king must be obeyed no matter what happens. Do you think I'm funny? Please kill me. Unless the officials look down on Gwaine. Why did this happen? Please kill me. The ministers had to lie on the ground following the high priests and the Hojo magistrate. King Sejong's anger flowed over the heads of those ministers. The only thing you can say is to ask me to kill you? Surely you will do.